Network.
Mr. Chairman, you are live.
Well, good morning, Corporation / Redistricting Committee for Wyoming. Happy Monday. As you're all aware, this is our first meeting to deal specifically with redistricting for this interim. I believe everybody in the committee got the numbers or has a presentation to have the numbers incorporated in them. It came out so far from each county. And before we get started, I guess we should call the roll, make sure we know who's here. Mr. Creech, you.
Senator Boner,
Excuse, he'll be here late.
Senator Case,
Present.
Senator Nethercutt, Senator Scott,
Here.
Representative Blackburn, excuse me,
Here.
Representative Wilson,
Here.
Representative Clifford,
Here.
Representative Duncan,
Here.
Representative Air,
Here.
Representative Hunt,
Here.
Representative McGuire,
Here.
Representative Roscoe,
Here.
Chairman Driscoll,
Here.
Chairman Zwanitzer.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Well, thank you, committee. First up on the agenda today will be historical background on redistricting brought to us from our own LSO, Mr. Swank. Before we turn it over to him for the next hour, any morning comments or initial discussion topics anyone needs? Not seeing any, so Mr. Swank, the floor is yours. Take us.
Yeah.
So the internet is on Casper College guest, and they do require you to put in your phone number to track you before giving you internet access. And with that, Mr. Swank, the floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Members of the committee, my name is Michael Swank, and I am the, I guess, one of the GIS staffers for redistricting committee. I provided a presentation, an updated one this morning that incorporates the 2020 official census information by county that we received last Thursday. Just as kind of a summary, so the revised slides in here will show a red revised word on it, just so you know which ones have changed. I tried to keep the presentation generally intact so you would know where things have changed. And then toward the end of this the presentation, there are about 10 slides that go over regional plan development or examples, and that I'll save for discussion later on in the meeting. This presentation is generally for basic background. Obviously, some of you who have been through a redistricting cycle before, this will be kind of a refresher. For those that have not, it'll be hopefully enough to kind of get you stepping down the path of redistricting this cycle. It will go over kind of the basics of the Wyoming's process in the past, the current legislative districts that were enacted in 2012, population trends by district, House and Senate district, a little bit of the description of the GIS system we will be using, and then the current districts and the deviations based on the 2020 census that data that we received. The basic redrawing of districts is sometimes called reapportionment. It defines new geographic boundaries for which representatives will be able to, or for where representatives will represent the population in that area. It is intended to be the process is intended to define districts that are substantially equal, and in general that tends to mean within a 5% plus or minus 5% deviation or total 10% deviation among the district size. The state constitution requires that the state legislature redraw districts based on the decennial census. So the 2020 census occurred last year. This interim used the process, and then the 2022 budget session will be when a bill will be drafted and proposed to the session. Management Council in, I believe, January set out their expectations of this committee in assigning this topic. It provided the guidelines, what they call management council guidelines for the committee. I wanted to highlight a couple of those currently. Originally, before we knew that there was a census delay, the committee was requested to draft a plan of how they would commence with this process through the interim, which included where they might be meeting for public hearings and that sort of thing. But obviously, with the delay in the census, that particular process did not occur prior to the 2021 general session. Another point about the guidelines is that it requires the committee to manage staff resources. Obviously, there can be volumes of plans, lots of discussion, public hearings, that sort of stuff. So it'll be important for the committee to kind of help distribute resources during this process. And sorry, one thing I will say is I will defer to my colleagues LSO if they have anything to add during this presentation for clarification. And then the last thing, which I think is where I think this committee will be headed later on this meeting, is adoption of principles. Now, these are the general criteria that the committee will define to direct how districts could be drawn in the state. In the past, I believe in 2011, there were 7 criteria, which included maintaining the deviation within plus or minus 5%, the 60 House and 30 Senate nested districts. Those were part of the criteria in 2011. And I believe that's one of the elements of discussion later on this afternoon. I did provide this slide. This is kind of a general slide related to the census metrics, how the state was enumerated and how the state responded to the census questionnaire. In general, the response rate increased, and part of that was likely because this year was the first, or 2020 was the first year the census did an online submittal. There was always either paper or interviews with follow-up. The other thing I wanted to emphasize is the use of administrative records. This was not used in the past as well. And administrative records were used by the census to confirm counts that were obtained through other means, whether it was through direct questionnaires or through follow-up to the individual addresses and so forth. So administrative records would be such things as institutional records, records from the Social Security Administration, that sort of thing. And like I said, they were used for confirming information. Slide 6 shows kind of how Wyoming compared to our surrounding states in terms of population growth. Now this slide shows the apportionment count. So this would be the apportionment used by the Census Bureau to define congressional seats. And it shows 577,719. And you'll notice that will be a slight difference than the resident population used during redistricting. Now that 577 also includes the overseas population attributable to Wyoming. That's generally stationed military personnel around the world. So our official resident count is 576,851. So there's roughly an 800 or 900 person difference. Any questions?
So help me out. Our official census number includes military overseas or does not?
Mr. Chairman, the apportionment count for congressional seats includes the overseas, but when an individual state redistricts, it's done by the resident population. What I will say is one of the things we learned during the Salt Lake City conference for NCSL was that the Census Bureau adjusted their overseas count slightly, where in the past they would count military personnel that were both deployed and stationed overseas. This year, or for this particular census, they were able to attribute all temporarily deployed personnel back to their state home address. So if you recall in 2010, the apportionment was 568,300, but the resident population was 563. So there's roughly a 4,000 to 5,000 person difference. So there's more included in our resident population this time around. The next couple slides go over the current district configurations. 2012, the legislature passed House Enrolled Act 8, Chapter 8. It has 60 House member districts, 30 Senate member districts, which are where 2 House districts are nested within those. It adopted every district was within the plus or minus 5% deviation. And the last point on this slide is to note that our Constitution does not require a specific number of House or Senate seats. It allows the legislature to define the number of seats but it does have a requirement that the Senate be at least 2 times, or the House be at least 2 times larger than the Senate.
And so, Mr. Swink, I'd be correct that when this bill comes forward to redistrict, that's the statutory reference of how many legislators that we're going to, there's nothing else besides that constitutional provision that holds us to any number of legislators. We could have 30, we could have 300, depending on what this committee's plan puts forward with amendments, et cetera.
Mr. Chairman, this is my understanding that the legislature is able to define the number of seats.
Every 10 years.
Or anytime.
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, we do redistricting at this point in time because of the census. You could redefine redistricting at any time.
Yeah, we're gonna hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just well on that topic to the, the discussion of ultimately how many total members we have in the legislature has kind of been discussed, but when was the last time, at what point, I mean, we have adjusted that in the past, and so for how long have we settled on the 30 and 60 numbers?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Swink, could you know? But I know Travis got
I believe the last time that the legislature did not define 60 and 30 was in the 1980, early 80 redistricting. Is that correct?
Senator Scott, historical memory.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. We went to the 30-60 after that.
And just for those people at home without the mic, we've been at 60-30 since 1990 census. Other questions at this point? Mr. Swink, back to you.
Mr. Chairman, slide 8. This provides the summary of the Wyoming census population since the year 2000. It shows 493, 563, 576 from 2000 to 2020. As you know, the original presentation provided further information on the population estimate that was provided by the census in May. Just for a quick reference, that population estimate was about 5,000 people higher than the actual census information. So I just have that there noted. The other portion of this slide provides what an individual House and Senate seat would contain in terms of population for each of those census periods. Under 2020, the individual House district, the ideal population, which is basically the total population of the state divided by the number of seats. Under this assumption of the 60-30 split, it would be 9,614 for a House district and 19,228 for a Senate district. And this is roughly a 220 person increase per district since the 2010 census for the Senate, or for the House, and then 440 for the Senate. Pardon me. Slide 9, 10, 11, and 12 provide some examples of the current configuration of districts. Now, for some of the metropolitan or Wyoming version of metropolitan areas, Cheyenne and Casper and Sheridan, Gillette and Rock Springs, some of those smaller districts will not show on this map, but I wanted to provide this as a general conceptual look at the state's current districts. So if you look on the right, it shows the deviation as of 2012 based on the 2010 census. The colder colors, blues, greens, and so forth, show the negative deviation, meaning those districts have less than the less population than what the ideal was at that time. And then the warmer districts, the reds, orange colors, have positive deviations, meaning those districts had greater population than the ideal. And then slide 10 shows the same version with the Senate districts. And as you can see, some of the lines kind of fade away because they are nested. So each Senate district has 2 House districts. And then I provided the examples of Natrona County, or the Casper area, and the Laramie County or Cheyenne area. Slide 11 is the Casper area, and it shows the House districts kind of going around the city of Casper, and then the larger districts in the rural areas of Natrona County. And then slide 12 shows Laramie County and the area around Cheyenne, shows the smaller, more compact, or maybe not compact, but smaller districts in area in Cheyenne, and then the larger districts as it surrounds the city. All these also obviously have the same deviation scale. If I'm going too fast, please slow me down. The next few slides go over how the geography sets out based on the census, as well as some screenshots of our GIS system. So this slide shows the 8 basic layers of census geography. There are additional layers, but these are the kind of the ones that most redistricting cycles use. The basic smallest level geography is the census block, and those are defined by the census with input from the states. So between decennial census, the Census Bureau actually does different outreach to the states based on making sure they have updated voting districts, making sure that the blocks are best representative of the areas in which they are incorporated. I'll note that in 2010, Wyoming had about 86,000 individual census blocks. This census, they reduced those down to about 55,000 or so. So they've incorporated multiple blocks into larger groupings, potentially probably because some of the areas there was a lot of areas that didn't have any population and didn't necessarily need to be defined separately. There is also, I'm not sure if it was as big an issue in Wyoming. I know sometimes on the coast, there are areas along the coastline where areas of the water are an individual census block as opposed to an area of land. So different states have different block counts. I believe Texas and California have 800,000 or 900,000 individual census blocks. The red levels on this particular slide, I highlighted these because these are the levels that all involve, excuse me, I should say this separately or differently. You're not able to cut them down below, or sorry, I'm saying this wrong. Census blocks build up the block group builds up the tract, and then those 3 levels are all incorporated within a county. So they do not cross counties, if I'm making some sense here. So when you use a county, say for a redistricting plan, it'll have a defined number of census blocks. It will not cut blocks, it will not dissect them differently. So you'll always know the population of those counties or the blocks or those levels below. Obviously, places or cities and towns can be cut into different blocks, so there will not be a single block. And then voting districts will also cross census blocks or potentially county boundaries. So I wanted to kind of make those distinctions.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, question. In the past, the voting districts were essentially equivalent to precincts, did not go across county lines, and were often the units we used to build a reapportionment. Are they still the appropriate units, or it's one of these other? What is there below the county level and above the census block level that makes sense for using to build a district, with the knowledge that sometimes we will have to use census blocks?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, whichever geography level you use, there's different potential challenges with it. You are correct that the census calls them voter tabulation districts, which are precincts, voting precincts. In different areas, whether it's Wyoming or other states, they are not guaranteed to stay within a county. And that's why they're not always defined under a county. But I do understand that there's different approaches to potentially drawing a district. You could start from an old district and maybe maneuver around the edges, or you can start from scratch. The challenge with starting from scratch and using census blocks is you have to define 55,000 different blocks. So there's usually a combination of those levels that you would use, whether you start with the whole district, then bring in a separate voting district or a separate block group, that sort of thing. I don't know that there's a best way. It's just a matter of trying to be most efficient and effective with getting there.
Mr. Chairman, I want to ask the question a little different way again. Am I right in understanding that within Wyoming, the voting districts do not cross county?
Mr. Chairman, I cannot confirm that.
That's an answer. Mr. Chairman.
Yep, go ahead.
When you talk about census block groups, census tract, voting districts, how many of each do we have in the state?
Mr. Chairman, I do not know offhand. I could do a count in the GIS system, but I did not actually do that. I just looked at the block level to kind of see what the total is now.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, I think we're gonna need to have that information and settle on one of these units is what we're gonna largely use. Our past experience was we used voting districts because they were the equivalent of precincts, so we could understand them. We did have some trouble in counties. We did have a county that didn't define its precincts geographically necessarily. I think that's been solved. Our previous experience was that no matter what unit we used, for some cases, we had to go to the census block level in particular circumstances to get the populations to come out right. But LSO is right. There's way too many of them to have that be the unit that we use below the county level.
Certainly up front. I mean, when we get down to the last.
When you get down to the last little
Yeah.
bit, then we do. Yeah, I'll bet there'll be a dozen places in the state where we have to go into a particular precinct or whatever unit we're using and use census blocks, because we can't get the population to get within that 5% plus or minus.
We agree with that, and Ms. Schwenk, I would assume that would be one of the principles as we move forward.
Mr. Chairman, it could be a principle. The GIS system allows you to utilize whatever level of geography that you wish to use, as long as it's available in the system.
Mr. Chairman, we request that we do get the numbers of how many of all these there are, because then we can make a intelligent on which one we're going to use.
And I just want to make sure your statement was we have 30,000 less blocks this time to be redistricting with.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. And the only thing I'll add is that at any level of geography, the size is not going to be consistent. So whether it's a voter tabulation district or not, there'll be different sizes and we'll have different sizes of population involved. So in all likelihood, you'll be utilizing all the levels of geography to refine districts as you go.
I would be correct that census blocks don't necessarily follow streets. Sometimes they follow geographic features or old riverbeds. I always find it interesting. So yeah, sometimes districts look really weird when there's nobody living in 4 square miles and you follow an old riverbed, and that's how they define the census block.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Might look more interesting than 30,000 less blocks this time. All right, sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. I'll just kind of skip over this one. This one was in anticipation of our census data coming that last week. We utilize Magnitude for redistricting from Caliper Corporation as our GIS system. It was utilized in both the last 2 redistricting cycles. It allows for the computer-aided mapping, spatial analysis, and it's when you do the redistricting process, it'll show you the different data tabulations, of what districts are formed, which ones are in preparation, that sort of thing. And I can show you that brief demonstration if desired. This kind of goes over more of those map-to-two mechanics, what kind of makes it more dynamic and beneficial than kind of maybe doing some hand-drawn maps maybe, or however each person prefers to do their districts. It allows you to copy plans. So if you want to utilize a prior plan or prior districts, and you can copy it over and then manipulate that rather than the original data. You can take snapshots and have backup files so you can know different stages in the process where those districts have changed and maybe do some comparisons. And you can run a volume of reports, but ones that are typically run are district contiguity and district compactness. Compactness is a little bit kind of amorphous in terms of how it's defined. It's used different measures, you utilize different mathematics to say whether it's compact, whether it's closest to a circle, or whether it's equivalent to a circle with a certain perimeter, that sort of thing. And then contiguity means that the district, you can go to every area of your district without exiting that. How easily you can do that is one level of contiguity.
And then would it be easy to find the current districts and their level of contiguity for, as we go forward, we can try to make sure our new districts are not exceeding the current?
Mr. Chairman, correct. The system will allow you to, so some of these are kind of like quality checks. So in general, you don't want to have a district that there's one district and then a piece of it is, encapsulated fully around or fully within another district. And that would show that district is not contiguous, that sort of thing. So those reports can be run as you get closer to the completing a map or a plan, and then that will kind of quality control, make sure that you're covering all your bases.
You don't have to drive through Rock Springs to get to Parson Eden as part of your district that goes to Rock River.
That is potentially an issue, or potentially a thought to go through. This is kind of the basic plan development. As I said, I can show you a demonstration, but you can bring in the old districts and then reassign them to different districts, or you can just bring the whole map in and then start from scratch and start assigning different areas or different levels of geography to a district and saving those. You will, at the end, you kind of lock and confirm your districts, and then you can run reports that can be incorporated within a bill draft that will eventually go to the legislature.
Scott.
Sorry, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I would comment that in previous redistricting, a lot of the work was actually done by hand. You can do a statewide plan relatively rapidly. That way, if you have to have a map and you have to have whatever subordinate unit we're using, national voting districts. And then you come down to a few complications where you have to do the census blocks, and that will require the computer. And you'll have to use the computer to make sure you got it right when basically you got the agreement. But particularly in some of the local draftings, but you can do a statewide plan in a couple of days without the computer. And that was widely done.
Mr. Swank, if LSO wants to engage in hand-drawn maps and not use computer for everything, you're certainly welcome to.
I may be one of the few people in the room that actually worked in cartography in my youth. So, Mr. Chairman, slide 18 begins kind of some of the screenshots I wanted to share with the committee. And as I mentioned, I can do a quick demonstration of the system if you desire as well. But basically, all of this starts in the system with the plan manager, and you can define individual plans. You can put plans within different libraries. So maybe you have a Senate draft plan library and a House draft plan library. You can develop templates so that all the district maps that you provide are configured the same way with the same data or the same look when you provide them. Plan sets is an interesting feature where you can have multiple plans open and show what they look like at different scales. So if you move to one area of the map, it'll show you the other plan in the exact same location. And then you can run a volume of reports and set up a template of reports to run when you complete a map. This one's kind of the basics of where you start redistricting. This map shows the current Senate districts in Wyoming. And I wanted to show some features. So the biggest area obviously is the map display. In the upper left-hand corner, it shows all the layers that you would add that you've added to the map. So it shows that there's census blocks added. And then whichever layers are green shows you which ones are actually shown on the map. So the ones that are in red are actually hidden at the moment. And then in this example, sorry. And then on the upper oval, it shows you which Senate districts, their current population, their current deviation, their compactness. This can also be, you can also develop this table to include all attributes that you want, whether it's the populations by race, populations by voting age, that sort of stuff. You can define more attributes within that table when you start your plan. On the bottom or the right side, the right kind of square oval or square or rectangle, that shows you kind of how your districts are changing. It'll show you which districts that you're targeting for change and how you're adjusting those. And then the bottom left is the toolbox that you use to set up how you want to start configuring your districts. Mr. Chairman, slide 20 kind of shows you how the census defines counties and places, or what they call places, which are generally cities and towns. It shows you those cities and towns more or less by area, so they're not just like a point on a map. It shows you actually how the census believes what the census believes the size of those areas are. And like I said, they try to, as much as possible, define these based on interdecennial census work with counties and states. But I will let you know that I had a request from an individual legislator a few weeks back to see if the census school district layer matched what the state has for school district layer. And there are some differences between how the census defined those and the way the Department of Revenue define those as they track tax collection. So they're not always 100% accurate, but we can utilize those or other data sets outside the census to help define those.
That's what other states, so in the back of, I think, all of our minds, I'm not planning on a lawsuit, but if one came, when, I'm gonna not jinx it, we are allowed to use other more Wyoming tools if we have better data than the census. We would be allowed to use those additional tools and say, we think the census has the blocks wrong or this layer wrong, and we can draw the line differently. Do you know if other states engage in similar practices? I guess is my ultimate question.
Mr. Chairman, I believe, yes, my understanding is that other states have used non-census geography to help define their districts. The only challenge is that geographies and layers that are outside of the census do not necessarily always directly correspond to the census blocks and the population count. So you may have geography that actually splits a block if you try to connect the two. So that I do believe there are other states that actually allow block splitting, but I don't know that at this point. I don't know that I could do that in the system, but that's a potential.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I think we cannot use population estimates other than the United States Census itself. Because Article 3, Section 48 of our Constitution says that the first budget session of the legislature following federal census, the legislature shall reapportion its membership based upon that census. And so I think that no matter what other states are doing, our Constitution says we've got to use the federal census. And I think one of the implications of that is that a census block, I believe, is the smallest unit that the census has where they show population. So as a practical matter, I think we cannot put a census block.
Hope we don't have to go down that road then. Okay, Mr. Swain, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, the only thing I wanted to clarify is that I wasn't trying to imply that that the state would be utilizing anything other than census population. It's just a matter of utilizing different geographies that would encapsulate those populations. That's all I was trying to explain.
Because ultimately we have to think about precincts for the county clerks and for how wards are drawn in cities, et cetera. We're drawing our boundaries, at least in the back of our mind. I'm sure our clerks will help us, our city officials, to ensure we're doing right by them as we move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Slide 21, I tried to zoom in and show a particular area. This is actually the area around Lander, Riverton, and the reservation, where it would show the places. And then this particular map shows census blocks. It doesn't actually show the population, but I wanted to at least give you an example of how many census blocks may be in a particular area. So all the grayish lighter lines in here are individual census blocks. And you can see, you know, different areas, whether it's Lander there on the bottom, or what they defined as Johnstown toward the top of the map. There's many different census blocks within there. As you get into city areas, the blocks would be smaller, potentially, like that would more likely correspond to a city block. Whereas in the rural areas, you can see that there are some very large census blocks that may not have any population, or maybe have one or two people in them. This one provides what would be the block group or the tract level. I believe on this map, the solid kind of hard to tell on the maps from my computer monitor. The more dashed lines, I believe, are the block groups, and then the solid lines are the tracts. So you can see that a tract may have 5 or 6 block groups within them. And then this one I wanted to show as an example. These are voter tabulation districts in the green here. Green on your map here. And you can see that those do not correspond directly to tracts or block groups. They kind of go through them and split them, that sort of stuff. But I believe the census blocks are defined to correspond to those districts as best as possible. The next couple maps, I wanted to at least show you kind of how the system would work. I've given an example of Senate District 11 and Senate District 12 on this one. So the Senate District 11, I believe, is our largest district in the state. It goes through Albany, Carbon, and Sweetwater County. And when you're developing a plan and you're trying to move geography around, as I showed you in one of the earlier slides on the bottom left, at least on this screen, it shows you the toolbox where it would show the target district that you're wanting to change, which is Senate District 11. The source would be taking it from Senate District 12, and then it kind of shows you, highlights those districts as the target of your plan development, and how you would, once you save those, it would maneuver, it would change the geography, move it over to the other district, and these other data fields would be adjusted to show you the different population changes. The next map I wanted to show you, and this gets to your contiguous question. This was an example of adding a certain, I think it's a block group, to House District 10 from House District 17. If you did that, and on slide 26, it shows you that now House District 17 is split and not contiguous. And you can see on the bottom, very hard to see, at least maybe on the slide, it shows non-contiguous area. It shows you that 2 areas of House District 17 are not contiguous. So that's an example of how you can run those reports to show you where potential districts are not kind of complying with some of those principles if you develop them. So that's kind of the gist of the GIS. But like I said, if you want to get a quick demonstration, I can show you how to develop some quick, or show you how it loads it up.
How about we get to the presentation, and then depending on time and desire, we'll discuss. So we've already discussed this a little bit, challenges of redistricting and the geographic challenges. Census block, as we discussed, is the smallest unit, but there are a lot of them. And if you went from scratch, it would be, you can choose, sets of them together, but if you wanted to define it from the census block level, it would probably take more time, more patience. You can use the voter tabulation districts, or the block groups, or the tracts, and other levels of geography. One of the things that we will discuss later is the idea of regionalizing plan development, so that you're not necessarily doing it at an individual city level or a county level, but you'd be kind of combining counties, because at certain times you may have to have districts cross county boundaries. And then one of the other areas where this gets to the management council guidelines, having a consistent process either through the committee or with the committee in getting plans submitted, whether it's through committee members or through the legislature, that sort of thing, trying to maintain a consistent workflow through the committee to staff and so forth, so that we can get plans as developed quickly and efficiently as we can. Slide 28, this kind of goes with population estimates. I'm going to kind of skip over this one, other than to show you that on the next slide, it showed the difference. It's going to show the difference between the actual census and the estimates, and it shows how different counties were over and underestimated. So here it is. That other one was using the estimate data. I didn't want to skip over. So this one shows you what the official count was that we received on Thursday, and the original estimate that we provided to you in our original presentation. It shows you the difference statewide as well as by county, how the official numbers change from the estimate. Albany County at the top, there's in yellow. I kind of highlighted some counties that had greater than 5% difference between the estimate and the official population. For the most part, the changes do not necessarily impact at least the example that we have at the end for regional plan development, but I just thought this would be a good kind of educational piece as to how you may have been looking at the data for the last 3 weeks. Now, this particular slide actually gives the census changes over the last 3 census by county. There's a few elements I wanted to highlight on here. The kind of shaded gray or darker colored counties, those are counties that, despite facing or having growth in the first decade of this century, 2000, 2010, there was enough declining growth in the last 10 years
to actually show a declining growth for 20 years in those counties. So Carbon County is an example. It grew by 246 in the last, or for the last census between 2000 and 2010, but dropped by 1,300 people in the last 10 years. So that shows an overall decline for the last 20 years. So I just wanted to highlight that. And then the two counties that have experienced overall growth or decline for the last 20 years is Hot Springs and Black County. This is kind of a different way of looking at that same data. These are maps that show the increase or decrease in population by county. It shows that in between 2000 and 2010, the Sublette County was the fastest growing, grew at about 70%. And then it kind of goes down from there. This one is based on the estimate, so I'm going to skip over that. And then on slide 34, it shows the 2010 to 2020 based on the official data we received on Thursday. Shows that there weren't many counties that grew a lot, but there were a few counties that did show some appreciable growth. Teton, Lincoln, and Landon County are the highest, and then it goes down from there. Sublette County, despite its large growth in the previous decade, shows the largest decrease in population as well for the last decade, or for this most recent one. This particular slide shows the estimate, but I'm going to go to the next one because this shows the actual. It shows 18 counties showing growth over the last 20 years. But between the estimate and the official data, Goshen County and Niobrara are kind of switched places on this slide. Niobrara actually showed growth, but in the estimate, it actually showed declining population. And then Goshen had the exact opposite. And then on the far right, the fastest growing counties, these are counties that have not only grown, but they've increased their share of population of the state. So for example, in 2000, they were at 6%. In 2020, they now have 6.5% of the state's population. So between the estimated data and the official population, Albany County was changed. It now is no longer one of the faster growing counties because it actually has less population as a proportion of the state than it is in 2000. But everything generally played out the same as the estimated data. And then this may be the one that everyone's probably wanting to know. These are the current House district deviations based on the 2020 census. Now, there are a lot of districts between the 0 and 5% plus or minus, but there are ones that have either decreased or the deviation has increased above 5% or below -5%. And it kind of shows you by district. Again, it's hard, obviously, to zoom in to say Cheyenne or Casper and so forth, but this shows you, at least on the House side, the kind of scale of the deviation these current districts have based on the most recent census data.
So the red color are the highest growing, fastest growing districts, and the dark blues are where population is receding. Would that be a fair statement?
It's not exclusively that. There's a challenge with this. These are the deviations. So this shows where the district population currently is based on the current count in those districts. It generally does apply that your district will increase. You would have a larger positive deviation potentially, but there's also kind of a counteracting piece where if you already had a negative deviation prior, but you're growing or you're declining, the deviation would still adjust differently. It's not. I guess what I'm saying is it's not a guarantee of growth in that area, but it generally does correspond to that.
Generally, if we kept the same 60 districts where they were, the blue areas need to be enlarged and the red areas need to be shrunk to meet goals.
Based on the current ideal for the 2020 census, correct. And then I actually have this map on the GIS so that we can maybe zoom into Cheyenne or Casper or Sheridan or however the committee would wish to do that. And then this is the same map for the Senate districts. The challenge with the Senate districts is obviously they have nested House districts. So whatever the deviation for a House district was doesn't necessarily always correspond exactly with the Senate district. There may be growth in the city versus the rural area and that sort of thing. So the deviations aren't, it shows the same scale and the same way of looking at it, but they're not always going to correspond exactly. And then for the next 6 slides, I wanted to show what the districts look like in the last 3 cycles. So this is the 1992 House districts. I wanted to show this kind of, or these examples kind of in relation to the committee's discussion in June, where there were the concept of the donut and the pie-shaped districts. This one isn't as good on that, but if you look in the lower left in Uinta County, it shows basically the city of Evanston as kind of the donut hole in the remainder of Uinta County. There's a similar concept to this in the current districts between Carbon County and the city of Rawlins. And then there's another concept, the pie-shaped district, if you look in Laramie County, and this appears to be consistent across the 3 cycles, where you have the individual districts within the city, but then there are also districts that kind of float out from the city and go into the rural areas where they get bigger as you get into the rural area. So this was an attempt to show you some of these concepts. It also shows you which counties and districts that cross county lines in different fashions. So I thought it would be kind of a reference for the committee for this cycle as to how the districts were defined in prior cycles. So this is the 92 House, this is the slide 40, is the 92 Senate, and then it goes the 2002 House, 2002 Senate, and then the 2012 House, and this is where I'm going to show you I believe Senator Case explained this in the last meeting. Rawlins is in the center, and then the House district goes outside of it. So those are kind of those 6 slides. And then we kind of get into the regional plan development. That was kind of where I was going to stop, at least for this discussion, since we have a whole agenda item related to regionalization. I am happy to take questions. More questions, I should say.
Committee, questions on where we've been for the last 3 decades? To help us out on where we're going. Not necessarily seeing any. We're running 10 minutes ahead of schedule, which never happens. Does anybody want? You have questions on this? Let me make sure the committee doesn't have any questions. I guess we'll take comment from the public on history. If we have time, sure. Come on down. Yeah.
I just have a couple questions.
Oh, we need to use the mic, yeah. And I just remind everybody, there was a sign-in sheet by the door. If you haven't signed it, please do so before you head out. Welcome to redistricting.
I just have a couple questions.
And state us your name and who you represent first.
I just represent myself, Mary Schmidt. The questions I have is, Senator Scott spoke about in the 90s, we increased to 30 and 60. We decreased.
Senator Scott, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, the Senate stayed at 30, it's been that way, I think since 1970.
Okay.
The House came down from 64 to 60.
Okay, and I guess my general question is, why did we change it then? What was the reasoning? Was it population decrease? Was it money? Was it, what was the general?
Senator Scott, I'll tell you what I heard, but go ahead.
I think the primary reason was that they were having trouble fitting 64 members into the House chamber physically.
We got new desks and
And whatnot. We made it where I was there when at 62, and that was crowded, and 64 was a little more crowded. And we went to we were forced away from the county at large system by Governor Sullivan with the sign up plan. We couldn't get a reasonable plan done by the district. We lost a court case. Governor Sullivan said it had to go through a single member district, so there was a massive change. So we brought the number down to 60, which is, the Constitution says that the House has to be at least twice, no more than 3 times the Senate. And this was a chance to use a nested system, which made a lot of sense to me. So it was a combination of doing that and frankly, the House was feeling they were overcrowded, which is nice chamber.
Then the other question I have is, why are we using, I noticed on your formulas and things that we're using an estimated population number in addition to the actual census number? Once we have the actual census numbers, why do the estimates come into play at all?
I I believe it's because that's what we've been operating under until now, and Mr. Swink was just letting the committee know, here's kind of where we were, and all of a sudden it's changed in a week, and I don't, as far as I know, Mr. Swink, we're now using the official census numbers, but we're just trying to help us as we've been using one set, and now we've changed it 1 week. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, correct. So this original presentation was set out for August 6th, and we were not supposed to have the census data until at the latest August 16th. Since we got the data last week and this meeting was rescheduled, all the information that we will be going on from this point out will be the actual census information.
So these formulas no longer, I mean, because your calculations are including an estimate as well as the actual. To make the decision.
Yeah, go ahead. The microphone would be helpful, but if you just say that one more time and start with just Mr. Chairman for process sake.
Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
The question, the reason I'm asking for the estimates is because I'm looking at your calculations that you have on this page that you sent out, and you're using the estimate along with the actual and to get your percentages. So is this just null and void now because you have the actual?
Mr. Swink.
Mr. Chairman,
I'll give you the mic at lunch. Go
I
ahead.
believe the document you're referencing was sent out for the August 6th meeting and therefore is now out of date, correct? So we will be utilizing census information, the official data from Thursday from this point forward.
Senator Driscoll, go ahead.
Huge thank you to all the staff. The old numbers are all outdated. They actually, in a 3-day period, updated all of this in the new stuff, and all of it was left the old for comparison, because we thought certain counties had grown. They didn't in the final. So yeah, it's all throwaway, but staff, they work on weekends. So the public can actually see what the real numbers are going forward.
And we had released the meeting materials to the public ahead of time.
Sorry,
and
yeah.
So that was, I think, why we're morphing, because we released the meeting. for we have. But Scott,
I just have
Yeah, go ahead.
one last question is that Mr. Chairman, I've understood that our representation is crossing county lines, which if you guys are representing a certain district or Senate or House district and it's crossing county lines, then you obviously are going to put yourself in a pickle when it's apportioning money. So can we look at not crossing county lines in our districting? Because you can't answer to two different districts or counties and solve two different county problems. I was looking at some of those maps and you got little cutouts in Natrona County, you got cut out, and that's, I know it's population, but you're cutting out large portions of landowners and interests.
Mr.
You'd
Chairman,
be surprised what we can do.
I'll take
Senator
the first
Driscoll.
stab at this. So prior to the 1970s, we were exactly that. We were county lines. You know, we had a federal law and a series of lawsuits that said one man, one vote in a real county system. Federal law supersedes the Wyoming Constitution, or their Constitution does. And so these court cases laid out that we could not continue as we have. So for myself, for example, I represent 6 different counties now since I because of redistricting, moving around. And there's no way around that. If you read the court case, I'm trying to think of the name of the senator case. Scott. The one main court case, Wyoming actually dragged their feet. They didn't follow the law. And the Fed stepped in and said, you go follow the law or we'll do it for you. Hence, when Mr. Sullivan did it. So we're forced to that. We're close this time to being able to follow county lines. We try to do it as much as we can, without a doubt, because you're correct. I can tell you firsthand, you represent Rich County and Ford County at the same time. It presents problems. So we do the very best we can. You'll hear a lot of, if you watch some of these meetings, you'll hear a lot of debates, a lot of how we go about it. I'll be bringing an amendment to try to bring a statutory change to make it where we follow county lines as much as possible. It's a little bit.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment questions on the history of redistricting? I know lots of people want to testify about where we're going or have questions, but anything on where we've been? Not seeing any committee members. Do you want a quick demonstration on map 2, or are we good? Representative Hunt?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, what I guess is based on how much time might that take, but sure, why not?
Mr. Swank, do you think we can do something in 10 minutes and pick a county? You want to pick Center of Endicott County?
So I did want to show one quick, this is the,
And Mr. Swank, if you put that mic right up to you,
Sorry.
the text messages are coming in that
okay.
they can't hear your.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I went and do a plan demonstration, I wanted to show, kind of highlight, say this is Laramie County, Cheyenne area. These are the deviations within the city of Cheyenne. So you couldn't see it on the large map. I was just kind of showing you how you can zoom in and zoom out. That sort of thing. But anyway, for a plan, let me close this real quick. So I would go into the redistricting plan manager. And then I already have some defined plans, just at least for example, but I'm going to go to, so this is the current enacted house boundaries. And this is sample data, this is training data, so this will not have the actual 2020 population. I just wanted to clarify that. So now this kind of set up the way I showed you in some of those screenshots. We have on the left side the display manager, or that shows all the different layers that are currently within the map. Some of them are hidden, some of them are showing. And then you have the data view 1, which is the currently defined districts, shows their population, kind of goes, shows different populations for different ethnicities and races, that sort of thing. So that's what I was trying to mention earlier, where you can define the attributes that you want to show within the map. Then on the data view number 2, it shows you how you're going to change districts. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show the census block. I'm going to highlight that, and you should see they become quite numerous. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit further on the map. So I'm just going to go to the southeast portion of the state. And obviously, when in doing this, all these little windows kind of start to become a little bit voluminous. So this kind of shows Laramie County, the currently enacted districts, and the census blocks. So if I wanted to say change, currently House District 10 has a higher deviation. I believe it's 10 or 20 or 10 or 15%. So I would go in there, I would target House District 10, and that one will be highlighted. And then say I take it from House District 7. And we set the source of the district for 7. And I'll show exactly where it is. And then I can have, right now I have the selection layer. So the selection layer is the layer at which you're going to move the geography. So right now we have census block. I think I have voter district in here as well. I'll highlight that real quick. So you can see the darker line. So if I wanted to change this to a voter district, that would be my selection layer. So right now I'm going to change House District 10 from House District 7. I'm going to select a voting district. And it's running slow. There it is. So that shows you that right now nothing is saved. So nothing's changed. It's just showing you which one you want to move. If I were to do this green check, that would save it and that would change the boundary. That's just an example of how you start maneuvering with the system, taking voter districts. So if I wanted to go to block level, I could do that. And then I could maybe utilize one of these little boxes and select a whole group of blocks like right there. Hit the define, maybe a bigger one, sorry.
And so we're going to get into this later today, Mr. Swank, but we will have, lots of public participation on submitting maps. My question is, there are probably 6 to 8 services who can do redistricting software, drawing. Some have free trials, some you can do at home. What's the capability of Maptitude if some member of the public submits a plan? does Maptitude allow you to have an outside plan and drawn in a different view or easily assimilate into a Maptitude? Or are we going to need the public to submit on a Maptitude server to submit a plan to the committee?
Mr. Chairman, you are correct. There are multiple vendors out there that do this. The primary ones that are most well known for doing this are Caliper and Maptitude, and Esri or ESRI, which is kind of the gold standard in GIS software. There are free versions of software out there. I believe there's 3 or 4 that you did some research on that will support the file types that you'd be using either in Maptitude or Esri, which would be a shape file for Esri, and then I believe in Maptitude they're either geographic. The extension is they're like a geographic information file or something like that. I can look at it, but that would be, we would be able to bring in some things. I don't know. I don't know offhand how many different softwares are out there that people could use to submit. No, go ahead.
Mr. River, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, so it's depending on what the committee wants to do today. But if you decide to purchase the online plan drawer, for lack of portal, yeah, they're calling it a portal, online plan portal, that would be the way the public would submit their plans. Now, if say a group of legislators got together with their county clerks and drew a plan, and it was at the county clerk's office and they had GIS software for their road and bridge, what they would do then is whatever legislator was spearheading that would give those shape files to one of the 4 LSO folks who will have GIS capability, and then we can convert those shape files into the Maptitude software that's needed.
And committee will certainly discuss later today how we want to go about allowing at what level of public participation, if they need to come through a legislator or an elected official, or we'll let anyone submit a plan, whatever they want, and how we look at those ideas coming forward. But so the ultimate question is, they generally need to be in an ESRI or a Maptitude, and if there's something outside, it may be more work for you to translate that over. Is that a fair assessment, that all the software doesn't magically, unless they use shape files, are congruent without some work?
Mr. Chairman, they would have to have a geographic file that can be incorporated in Maptitude. I'm not going to say that it's just those 2 systems. I know that there's several outside, either free or purchase softwares that I believe are capable of changing the structure of the file to submit to a different GIS system. I just can't say exactly how many or which ones there are, but as long as they can submit it basically in a compatible file, we'll be able to bring it into our GIS system.
Questions, committee? More Maptitude? Senator Scott, question, or I'm just thinking? All right, I think we'll let Mr. Swank off the hot seat unless anybody else wants to keep him up here. All right, seeing none. Thank you very much, Mr. Swank, and especially for all of the work, even what you sent out Friday, and I nicely asked to do some recoloring of warm and cold colors to make it a little easier for me. I really appreciate it. So, with that committee, there's lots of places we can go. The co-chairman and I, tried to maybe do a systematic how we move this forward in a responsible way. And we certainly discussed at our kind of open corporations committee meeting 2 months ago about regional areas. And historically, at least in the one time I've done this in 2012, we looked at certain areas of the state and what nicely fit. And then it go down several levels once we had some basic differentiations. And I know we put Senator Case and Senator Scott officially on the agenda to talk about backgrounds of redistricting and the background of historical areas. Senator Scott, you brought some information that LSO put in their presentation and some other information. And so if you'd like to maybe offer a historical background on how this committee has kicked off its work previously and how you think we might do that again.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, what we need. Mr. Mr. Chairman, these mics work better than the ones in the room at the Capitol. What we did 10 years ago was divide the state up into a number of regions and looked at the population in those regions really on a county basis and said, do we have to add or subtract to make them fit within the plus or minus 5%? And the committee had quite a role in where that was done. But so we defined the region, defined the parameters, and then had the actual plans drawn regionally. And I'll ask Senator Case to give his perspective on that. But my perspective was, I think we got much better quality plans having them done that way with a lot of input from local people and particularly input from the county clerks. I know in this county, the basic plan was done by the county clerk, given the parameters that we'd given her. And what she did, which made a lot of sense, was take the existing plans, adjust them for the population, because there were some population differences we had to change in this year, and then tried to make it fit geographic boundaries that the public could understand. And for example, I had a district that in the part of Casper next to Mills, it's called Mountain View, ran down a bunch of streets in the middle of things. And it was very hard for people to follow. And it was very hard for the county officials to follow. I know of at least one case where they put on the official rolls, a husband and wife living together in different districts. You know, just obvious error. But she took that and made the Robertson Road, which is a major thoroughfare, and State Highway 2026. That's the district boundaries there. And that was much easier for everybody to understand. That's an example, Mr. Chairman, of the kind of improvement that you can get by doing local districts. So I would propose that we do the same thing again this year in terms of getting plans developed locally. And I think it would also help the public. They could say, well, we want a different plan for Natrona County or for Laramie County, and not have to worry about a whole state that they don't understand. Just deal with their local area. Mr. Chairman, and I've prepared and want to go through what something similar would look like this time. But I would ask if Senator Case or anybody else involved in that on 10 years ago, they have a perspective on it.
Senator Case.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I thought that was an agenda item, so I had kind of some stuff.
You are.
I'm sorry.
No, you certainly are on the historical background agenda item, and I know I jumped.
I wasn't sure what you were doing there. So I'm sorry.
Chairman Proud.
I guess so.
I'm trying to find the most efficient way that we move into a discussion, and the historical background, I think, is really relevant on, do we want to follow what we've done historically, or we'll take some public comment too, if there's a different route we want to take this time. But yeah, certainly any comments on the historical background and how we've done regional areas, or the good and the bad that you've seen, you know, in 2 decades.
So thank you. Yeah, it's actually, I think this is my third time. So Senator Scott's got me beat. But, Mr. Chairman, I actually came into the legislature after the when we went single member districts, when we evolved away from the kind of county, loosely affiliated county-based representation. And so what I can say, last time I had the privilege with Representative Illaway, who led the effort. I was really proud of the district effort that we did. I can assure the committee that they can have confidence that we can do this and do it in a good way. And that people of Wyoming will be pleased with the results. I was very, we had a very successful redistricting. It involved lots and lots of public meetings, which we do not have time for now. And we were very well staffed. We had just wonderful people that stepped up. Mr. Obrick was the committee staff on redistricting. Matt Sackett, they need to be commended. There were others. This was the first time we really had this software capability, and that was very powerful. And we, it made it understandable and led to the outcome. As I look at the software now, it's even better. I think the information's better. I think the understanding of where we need to go is better. So I just think we can really have some confidence, and we have a pretty clear notion of the principles that we have to follow. I think they've really come about. We have a few things that are really important, and I'd like to point that out. And I know that we're going to have more presentation on it, but we have at least one area of the state, and actually happens to be part of my district, and Representative Clifford's, all of Representative Clifford's district, which is a majority minority area. That's extremely important in terms of federal court rulings, that you don't redistrict in a manner to dilute that representation. It's kind of a two-edged sword, and it kind of perhaps ties in with the donut theory versus the pie theory, which I'm not sure if I really did come up with that, but I think it's really illustrative of what we need to do. If a majority minority area has enough votes to have, say, multiple representatives, then you would want to take that into account when you draw those districts. If it can only have one, you have to take that into account. If it can only have one, you definitely don't want to split that district and throw it into other ways, because that dilutes the voting power of the majority minority people. But on the other hand, if they have more population and could actually perhaps successfully defend one district and maybe another, then that leads to a different outcome. So that you can't say, for example, prima facie, that something like a single member district or a multi-member district is necessary to protect the majority minority district. You really have to look at the circumstances there. We have made choices from the very beginning. This was even before my time, for single member districts. Single member districts were heavily advocated by the folks that wanted change back in the 1990s. And they were, the minority party was heavily into that. The minority groups, they felt that single member districts would be advantageous to having a representational legislature that represented Wyoming. I think the facts have not played that out. In fact, the opposite has happened. And that in most cases, if you think back to the discussion we just had about the majority minority district, you could think how single member districts might work to the disadvantage of groups. You could pick a county region, for example. Take all of Fremont County, just throw it all together. And you could say, well, that county is 30% Democratic. That county is such percent Native American. That county's, and then with single member districts, though, those criteria may or may not allow for a successful election of any of those members if they're paired in a single member district. For example, just say that there were 5 representatives out of this hypothetical Fremont County, and that there were 20% Democratic people in Fremont County. By having single member districts, you no way assure that the people with the 20% have a representative. Multi-member districts, you've got a better shot at it, I would argue. And I've been saying this for a long time, but it's now supported scholarly, and there's actually been some research done on it. And so it's much more well documented. One other thing I want to mention is the county lines thing comes back all the time. We litigated that issue in the last census. A suit was brought and argued that we did not pay enough attention to county boundaries. That suit proceeded through the courts, but was dismissed on summary judgment. The courts, I have the the court's order in that case. And it's just from the top down, the basics of it are starting that the US Constitution does, of course, have a Senate that is not represented by population, but all the House members are. A lot of states adopted that kind of thinking in doing their state plans over the years. But those have all been thrown out by the court because only the United States Constitution allows for this non-representation in a specific instance. It's the great compromise of our Constitution where we dealt with big states and small states and got them all together on the same page with respect to the Senate and House of Representatives. We have the series of Civil War era amendments that have extended that protection of the US Constitution to states, 14th Amendment in particular, to make it so that one person, one vote, it kind of laid the foundation for one person, one vote and the decisions that the courts have made. And it made it so that while county boundaries might be an attribute, and there is certainly an attribute noted in our Constitution, they do not swamp the population requirements of one person, one vote. In fact, that was very, very clear. And the proponents of more county line based thinking had numerous arguments. One was our Wyoming constitutional argument. The court threw that out. The second was there was an equal protection argument made. The equal protection argument was that legislators that come from county-based representation, and some of us kind of halfway are, had somehow that was an equal protection difference from counties like that did not have county-based, and that somehow their votes were diluted because they weren't voting in a county block. That was the argument made. The courts looked at the equal protection and they didn't apply a strict scrutiny. They applied the other standard for equal protection. And they concluded that clearly there was no merit to that argument about respecting county boundaries on an equal protection basis. So coming back to my thinking on multi-member districts, I think the same discussion about equal protection might come about in the discussion of multi-member districts. Frankly, with the majority minority district we have, I don't think that we can have that be part of a multi-member district, but I might be wrong when we really drill down on those numbers. But that means that some areas may be amenable to multi-members and some not. Some may find it more desirable. Some absolutely may not. Do we have to have it all be the same? If we were to go to multi-member districts, I think not. And I think that we could make the argument and survive the equal protection discussion that we might have there. So I hope we will entertain that. I think it could have good benefits for the makeup of our legislature and the notion that our legislature should represent as much as possible the people that are elected there. And I'll just say that the process last time, I'll just get this wrapped up. I know Senator Scott was the champion and had the foresight on the regional approach. It just struck him, and it made everything so much simpler. And I think the regional proposals that we're looking at now, they're in some sense reasonable places to begin. So it's a good thing. We had a lot of time last time to have meetings and get people on the same page. Some of the meetings were a little hotly contested, but by and large, they exposed issues in local areas that the local people ended up resolving. And we went around the state. I believe we had, was it 14 meetings? How many did we have?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I think we had 15 or 16 when it was all said and done.
And we didn't take the whole committee everywhere, but a bunch of committee members made it to different places. We sometimes had a couple meetings a day. Did a lot of traveling, but it brought the state together. And the plan survived the legislature. There was one change. The committee had a plan that had Senator Johnson and Senator Meyer in the same district. Senator Meyer successfully changed that plan as a floor amendment. It wasn't the committee's plan. I tried to fight that, but that's where we got the odd tail of the eastern side of the state that incorporates the prison. We need to fix that. We don't have any people living in the same district anymore around there, so we can make that better. And I hope we will. I will say that last time we also, Senator or Representative Roscoe, we did a better job with respect to places like Teton County. We fixed some problems that had been there before, where we arguably had some gerrymandering arguments. Again, not the committee's work from the prior 10 years, but another 4 of them at that time on the House. They kind of did some mischief in Teton County, which I think we by and large repaired. So I just say, go forward with confidence. We can do this. We can make it better for Wyoming.
Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question is, and maybe we're going to address this later on, because of our lack of time for all these regional meetings, what are we envisioning to be able to do in place of that?
Okay. So I think the discussion will be, will we try the regionalization approach again? What number of legislators are we thinking? I know Senator Scott has a plan. Alice has provided some data as well on what's achievable, how we break into regions, which I think will be a significant discussion on certain counties, right? Do we, and so I think a regionalization approach in the next 2 months. And I think we'll also talk today about, do we have one plan going forward? Do we have 3 or 4 alternative plans? What's the timeline when public can submit plans that we may incorporate, as broad scale versus, independent inter-county fixes? And so hopefully that all comes out during the discussion. I think I'm just trying to keep us on a slow, gradual, let's get there together. So at the end of this meeting, hopefully we have a plan going forward. There's not a great place to bounce to next, but I did want to ask about majority minority districts. It's my understanding, and I definitely correct me, that we do have one district and we tried to make it 66%. Is that what it, and I didn't know where the standard to create a majority minority district lies. Is there a certain percentage of a demographic minority population you have to have? And if anybody remembers why we settled on the current boundaries of it's House District 33 that you have, Senator Case?
Yes, indeed. It's House District 33, Mr. Chairman. And I commend Julie Freese, just rolled in. She helped us to identify by Census Block areas where there was a majority of Native American people. And we worked very hard to put every one of those census blocks together. And so you had to connect them sometimes if there was a census block in between that wasn't. But to maximize the voting power of tribal folks, it's simply a majority. You try to achieve a majority. The Wind River Reservation is unique because they have 2 tribes and they don't think the same, I assure you. So the census data is whether they're Native American. It's not which tribe they belong to. So it's a very contestable district no matter how they do it because they got a lot up against it. But we worked with tribal officials. I remember James Trosper and the leadership of both councils getting together with us to help with the boundaries. Ms. Freese worked very hard to identify parts of Riverton. Riverton has a higher, I think, more Native American folks living in the boundary of the city than Lander does. And Ms. Freese worked very hard to find those areas, and we included them in House District 33, and that would be, of course, Senate District 25. I hope we do that again. I hope we meet with the tribal leaders, whether we're going to have regional meetings or whether we're going to do what we've done for the past year and apply more virtual presence to make this happen. I hope we do a combination of both. The virtualness could help us with our timeline, but the in-person meetings are very important. And getting this county clerk in the room with the folks from the county is the most important thing we have.
Senator Scott, thoughts?
Chairman, I would add to that, we tried to have a district like that did after the 1990 census. There, the final single member district bill went through the legislature in less than a week because of the previous bill being vetoed by the governor. The bill was technically my personal bill. It was- I introduced the backup, but the plan had been done by Representative Gary, or Senator Gary Yorty. And it was a single member plan, which is what the governor was demanding. And we misunderstood. The history is we misunderstood where Representative Tipton and Lander lived and thought we had him in the Lander district. We had him in the reservation district, the minority district. And I believe he was an obstetrician. I believe he had delivered a majority of his constituents.
5,000 plus babies.
And he must have had a very good, he must have been a very competent doctor with a good bedside manner. And he was extraordinarily popular out in the reservation. And they elected him in a landslide, as I remember. And he served, frankly, until he died, and served very well. But that was the history in 1990. One of the reasons for, Mr. Chairman, for doing a regional approach, as I will point out, is that Ms. Freeze is the expert on how the Voting Right Act applies to Wyoming. And we do it that way, she can advise properly and get that district done.
Am I correct that Fremont County still has county commissioner districting as a,
And Mr. Chairman, that was a result of a separate lawsuit on representation for tribal members. So you overlay that. District 2. So we have 5, and there are 5 commissioner districts. We're the only county that has them.
so at some point today, committee, the discussion, if the committee agrees that we will have, a majority minority district, as we're trying to figure out kind of the touch points, the thing, the immovable as we move forward. Senator Driscoll.
Clear in Wyoming. Specific, you will start with that district on the redistrict, and you can do anything you want past there, but that specific piece, is that if you don't want a lawsuit, you will start. Period. I mean, they were blunt about it when you sat behind the scenes with them. It was no ifs, ands, or buts. You will start with this, and then you can do whatever you want past there, but you will take care of your minority unless you want to invite a lawsuit.
And is there a percentage of minority members you need to have? I just don't know.
Yeah, their little red book has it, but ours is pretty clear what they did before, so we're gonna have to do again. The Senator Case laid it out very well, is you can skip over some blocks to pick up others, but you need to pick up all that you can logically. You can't go one blocks away. You've got to pick up everything you logically pick up, and I think
They got to be contiguous. You've got to connect them.
that's what I'm saying. You may have to take a district that has no Native Americans in it, put it in with it to pick up 10 that are across the line. I think we should be able to do it again because it's not.
I mean, I guess that's the topic right now. Everybody in general agreement that we will have at least one majority minority district of how it can best be drawn. Ms. Priest, I know you're here. Is there a percentage number or any further elucidation you want to share on how we went about it a decade ago? Or, yeah, I'm just offering you the possibility if you'd like to come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as mentioned, obviously, I've been thinking about getting the tribes together already anyway. Because of the commissioner districting, it doesn't always mesh with the legislative districting. So it's interesting to see that Fremont County might be its own district, with all my own legislators. So that would be very interesting, but we have to basically start with the legislative piece, and then we start working on the commissioner district piece. And so that will be something that we'll have to hurry into as well, because it did change our representation the second time around. And we actually, the commissioners voted that one particular commissioner in a commissioner district
should be up for election when he really wasn't. I mean, he was elected for a 4-year term, but it moved enough that he voted to go ahead and take a 2-year term on that. So it is a big deal, and it does take all of these same criterias in. And as clerks will tell you, not just me, but clerks will tell you what we're really going to try to do is follow all districts that we already have, because to make something where we call split districts that have splits in your ballots is very hard on election judges to make sure they give out the right ballots. So that's what we're going to focus on. And we'll talk to you a little bit this afternoon about that. But so that's the only update I wanted to say on that. Okay, thanks.
All right, Senator Scott, microphone's on, go ahead.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, if we're ready, let me go through the possible regions that I've identified for redistricting. These are based on what we used last time. I think they may be identical. I may have treated Carbon County slightly differently. They are county-based in this presentation for 3 reasons. First, our state constitution does mandate the use of counties. We can't follow that entirely, but it's useful. Second, our counties really are communities. And that makes a lot of sense to try to keep communities together. Even where you have multiple communities in a county, they're at least used to dealing with each other. And you have more back and forth between people and their representatives and whatnot when you're all in the same community. And third, frankly, the numbers I had, and I do thank LSO for taking the trouble to get me the numbers as soon as they came out, so I could do this based on the final population. We're at the county level, Mr. Chairman. I will say, watch out for math errors. I think I've got them out of here, but the first, I start in southeast corner, Laramie County. You've got now 100,000 people there. Justifies 5 centers, what they've got now. The average district size is very close to your maximum size on your plus or minus 5%. You can see in the calculation above where we got the ideal district size and then a maximum and minimum size. The first line, 500 average district, 20,102. You could theoretically take in 435 more. That would probably make it impossible to do the necessary sub-districting within Laramie County because you can't split census blocks. You need a little margin. You could, if you had a hungry neighbor, you could give up as many as 9,000 people, almost a house district, to other areas. But Laramie County this time can be districted entirely within its own boundaries. You no longer need that current thing we've got that reaches out and grabs the prison in Goshen County. And a matter of fact, I think if you did it, you would promptly put Laramie County's representation over the maximum district size. So I think you can't. Well, we shouldn't do it. We can't. But it can be done entirely within the boundaries of Laramie County. And probably should be. So there's first district, Albany County, 2 senators. They are relatively close with the final numbers to the minimum size. You can district Albany County entirely within its own boundaries. Historically, we've included the Rock River area in the Carbon County district. If we did that this time, we might have to compensate for that by grabbing a small area out of Laramie County. And that's something we'll have to keep in mind going forward. But it's possible the district Albany County entirely within its own boundaries. Third one I had was this county, Natrona County. Average district size 1998, 4 senators and House members. I apologize. I'm assuming one way or another, we're going to continue having twice the number of House members in each area as we do senators. So I've done this in terms of Senate districts. We could take some from the outside. We could give up to, if necessary, to make some other area work. You can see the figures there and how they're calculated. We could do it entirely within our own boundaries as we did last time. Fremont County, same story. You've got 2 senators with an average district size of 19,617, slightly over the ideal, but really quite close to the ideal. You could absorb from elsewhere 1,144. You could give up to elsewhere 2,700. And that's very important because we'll discover, Mr. Chairman, we've got a hungry neighbor that needs some. But you can do it entirely within its own boundaries if we define what has to be given up to, frankly, the Bighorn Basin. We'll see that when we get to it. Then Fremont County can do it entirely within its own. And I would caution the committee, you've got to give Fremont County enough margin so that you, Ms. Freeze can do a district that is the minority district to work for the reservations. Sheridan and Johnson County, they're together now, supposing to keep them that way. 2 senators, average district size 19,684, again, relatively close to the ideal. You can see how much they could absorb or give up to elsewhere. And they can be districted together within their own boundaries locally as they are now. And when you think about House membership, this is a case where you have Johnson County almost has enough for its own representative. Not quite, it has to get some from Sheridan County, be within the minimums. But it would make sense to have a single member district that was primarily Johnson County. I think it'd be 97, 98% Johnson County. But it might also make sense for Sheridan County to have either one Senate district where the 2 House members ran at large, or have all 3 of them run at large within Sheridan County as a whole, Mr. Chairman. You can do it either way. And my recommendation as the committee is that we listen to local recommendations on doing it, whether they would prefer to keep single member districts or use multiple member districts, or as in the case of Sheridan Johnson, maybe some mixture of both would be what would make sense. So I point that out as a choice there that I would suggest the committee we try to leave to a local option. I do think that the current House districts are a bit of a problem. We have consistently had recruitment problems with getting enough candidates, so there's contests. And in Sheridan County, after the 1990 census, one of those elections, we had a district that had no candidate filed from any party until the last hour of the last day of the filing period. And that's not healthy. We need to have the recruitment problem with the size of our House district. Okay, now we go to some of the areas that are a little different. Northeast corner. And I define that as Campbell, Converse, Crook, Goshen, Niobrara, Platte, and Weston. The LSO has given us a version that divides things up a little differently. I did it this way because you get 5 senators, 10 House members, average district size, very close again to the ideal. A little over it. But notice that none of these counties could be their own either House or Senate district. Campbell County, for instance, has 2 senators now, but it has a fair amount of its territory in several other Senate districts. And if you tried to make it a 2-senator district, you wind up with an average of 23,000 and some per senator, which is several thousand over what's permissible. You never get that by a court, and that's true right through all these districts. Campbell County is the one with two and too much population for 2. Converse and Goshen will dominate a Senate district, but they aren't big enough, either one of them, to be a separate Senate district. So this one, you're going to have to cross county lines on some scale. And frankly, we had trouble with that last time, but I think it'd be much better done locally, where you can work out agreements that everybody can live with, everybody understands. Carbon County. 14,537 population. You've got, it's going to dominate a Senate district, just given the geography and given the fact that that population is 96%, the way my calculator rounds it, of the ideal district size, and 80% of the minimum district size. So it's going to be the Senate district under almost any circumstance, but to be within the federal bounds, you've got to add population from somewhere. What we did last time was go to the Rock River area in Albany County, which is relatively small, and the Sweetwater County. The Rock River area might be a bit of a problem this time. Sweetwater County, when we get to that, has too much population to just have 2 senators. It makes some sense to go there. But that's dealing with that issue is going to be one of our problems. Bighorn Basin is the next region. And, you know, the geography, I think we all know that, it's pretty obvious. 3 senators, average district size, 17,817, that is below the minimum. You've got to add, if you have 3 senators there, you've got to find 1,350 more. The just Senate district size is 93% of the ideal district size. So I don't think you want to try something with less than 3 senators and 6 House members. And no county has the right size to have it be its own Senate and House district. And the geography is such that last time we decided we almost had to come out into Fremont County, take Shoshone and Lyside. I'm afraid we might have to go a little farther, and frankly, maybe even in my Senate, current Senate district, to get the necessary population. But that's an issue where the committee is going to have to deal with. How do you get enough population? They were able to get an agreement that everybody could live with between the legislators and the county clerks up in the basin last time. But you have to give them enough population. And just 1,350 is not enough. You're going to have 6 House districts there. You can't split Census Block. You need 100 or more people extra per House district so that you've got the flexibility to match your geography and your census blocks and make it work constitutionally. Southwest corner. The way it's defined here is Lincoln, Sublet, Sweetwater, Teton, and Uinta. That was a difficult one. That was the region we used before. For practical purposes, we may have included how much they had to, I think we had to include how much they had to get to Carbon County in what they worked on. Senator Marty Martin, Democrat, who was a member of the committee, and Stan Cooper, Republican, who's not a member of the committee, but spent a summer working out a compromise everybody can live with. And they did a marvelous job. It was a man-killing job, and neither one of them chose to run for the election, which was unfortunate. But that region, Lincoln County actually is the right size to be its own Senate district as a single senator. But that's the county we've got with the greatest division between the north and the south half of the county. Basically, and we've got Sunday Dog Center here, but basically you have to go through Idaho. You get from the north half of the county to the south half of the county. And so it's one we have divided going all the way back to 1965 when we were forced to combine counties. So historically, we've divided Star Valley with the northern part of this area. Kemmer area with the southern part. The other counties, Teton County is 2,000 people too big for its own Senate district. Uinta County is 300 or 400 too big for its own Senate district. Sweetwater County is about 4,000 too big for its own 2 senators. You have to divide it out. And so that's, Mr. Chairman, that's another regional one that's going to be difficult, but I think would be the best chance you can get it. Look, the fallback position is 1 or 2 members of this committee that have to do a plan and give them their best judgment. I think that's very suboptimal. It's a solution we used in one of the regions before, but I think it's very suboptimal. That's I've done on the 3rd page some possible alternate regions and subregions. At least one of them, the carbon number 16, carbon Sweetwater, is one that the LSO considered as a possible district, and that would work. Just those three senators and 6 House members. You would find the Carbon County district would go into the urban area of Rock Springs if we do. And that's difficult because that Carbon County district is so big to be very difficult anyhow. But you can see some of the other possibilities there. The Crook and Weston and the Crook Weston Niobrara and the Goshen Niobrara, all possibilities, but then none of them actually work within their own boundaries. That northeast corner is going to have some difficulties crossing county lines. The population limits and avoid losing the loss. And Mr. Chairman, I'm not so much scared of getting sued, I'm scared of losing it. Goodness knows what we get up with on that score. The guidelines that the courts follow are a little stricter, and they're less likely to take population, take communities of interest in counties and that sort of thing into account, and we're likely to wind up paying attorney fees. It's not mandatory, but ask LSO and the reply I got was It's not mandatory, but it is frequently imposed. And you lose a redistricting lawsuit, you're likely to wind up paying the opposing attorney's fees. So, Mr. Chairman, that's my presentation. That's my recommendation of the districts we use, mostly because they seem to make sense in the geography, given our past experience as districts. I think one of the choices we make is, do we just say Carbon, Sweetwater County, you guys are together, work it out, or do we include them in a general larger Southwest district? And that does make some sense, because the Uinta County, the Bridger Valley there, which some of it has to go somewhere else other than the Uinta County District, Mr. Chairman, just because of the population. They're a bedroom community for the Toronto mines in Sweetwater County. That makes some sense, and so does the Kenmore area, Trend Mountain Common with that corner of Sweetwater County. So the committee could go either way on that, Mr. Chair.
Question for Senator Scott on the information he presented. I know the committee has his write-up in front of you. Not seeing any currently, Senator Scott. And
I would say, compared to what we've seen in some previous years, the way the population worked out this time, I think the problem before this committee is simpler than it has been in the past. And I think we can make it work even given the time constraints.
you want to? You have a question eventually. Ken, Representative Roscoe, you had a question, Senator Scott?
I did, I guess, just for my own clarification, but I think this, when we worked on this last time, the regional plan worked really well. But these are, we worked within the regions as best we can, but we can still, then after that, we can still, if we need to tweak it a little bit, we can extend those regions.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, the point of that is, point of this is to say, where are the places where we have to tweak the region? So we can say to the Bighorn Basin, yes, we know you need, really, it's about 2,000, probably a little less than 2,000 more people. What are we going to give you? Well, you look at the logical place to come out of the Bighorn Basin is through the Wind River Canyon and just Shoshone and Lysol, which is what we've done this last time. Give them that, decide what else we're going to give them, and tell them this is what you got. We'll get us districts that are within the plus or minus 5%. And then regional people can work with them. Now, we're fortunate in the number of counties we've got that can be done entirely within the county. But you've got these other regions that can't. And we'll have to invade in at least one a county that can be redistricted entirely within itself. But where else are you going to get population in the Bighorn Basin, given its geography? I mean, if you say go to Teton County and take some of the population there, take care of the Fremont, to take care of the Wind River Basin problem. You've got people that have in 6 months of the year when the park is closed, have a 6 to 8 hour drive if they want a face-to-face meeting with their representative. That's not good representation.
Follow-up question, Representative Roscoe?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, then let's take a 10-minute break. I'll double check on questions you may have for committee members. And then we'll just kind of keep chugging along. I think my next area that I'd like to talk about is kind of the pinch points, the basin being a big one, Star Valley, things that have geographical requirements that we need to make sure we figure out as we go forward. So with that, let's take a 10-minute break, come back at 10:40, and we will come back at 10:40.
Yeah, it might have been 10:35, but otherwise.
Assembly Representative Air and Clifford are online. Forum. They're going to give it about 1 more minute for members to return for a break. There come 3 of them. All right. Representative Air, do you have a question? I saw your hand was raised. Representative Air, do you have a question? You have that hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do, maybe a comment and then a question. I like the regional plan, and I think Senator Scott's plan has some good qualities. I guess a question or a comment would be, why not put Carbon County either in with Sweetwater County or Albany County? Seems like that would make more sense to me. And then my question would be, once we decide on these regional areas, will the legislators from that region then form a subcommittee to work on the plan for that region?
I think that is an excellent question, and it does make sense that we would have, representative from that region be on that plan, but also probably good to have somebody not from that region as well, who would make sure that, the other contiguous continuity requirements are met. Senator Scott, thoughts?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, 2 thoughts. I think you probably want, when you do a local committee, you want the local legislators, whether or not they're on this committee, involved in it.
Senator, can you use your microphone, please?
Mr. Chairman, I think you also want to include the county clerks who've got to run the elections. The wisdom that they can bring to one of these things is considerable. And I don't know how you may want to not get too big. Some places may include county commissioners too. And not all the legislators have always participated, has been our experience. The other thing in terms of, as I understand the question was combining Carbon County with Sweetwater County. That is, Mr. Chairman, clearly an option that this committee could take, because that as a district does work. But then you've got to look and make sure that the other part of the southwest corner can get its job done without them.
And correct me, up until the last redistricting, we had previously divided Rollins in half. And from what I remember from the testimony and public comment 10 years ago, the city of Rollins were strongly in favor of having one legislator, not dividing their city in half with 2 legislators, which in my mind would give them double the kind of legislative power, but they said that was not what they wanted, which then necessitated District 48, the largest continental U.S. House district in the country, to being formed. And so I think we have some questions for Rollins again this year, how they want to proceed.
And Mr. Chairman, that's the classic kind of question that I think is safer to leave to the local people to fight it out amongst themselves.
And then answer your questions, Representative Eric. Excellent. All right, committee, as we continue to proceed, where I want to go next is kind of the the issue areas of the state that we, no matter what the plan ultimately looks like, we have some geographical difficulties, and I would acknowledge Ripon of Washington, Casper, and President Dockstetter in the Senate from Star Valley are here in attendance today, and certainly anytime you'd like to come join the committee or testify on your part of the state, that would be great. I'm sure everybody in the committee realizes the Bighorn Basin is, after the majority minority district, is probably our greatest area of concern, primarily geographically, that in the basin, there's in the winter, you're probably not going over one mountain to Sheridan or Buffalo and not going over the park to Jackson, which necessitates drawing those districts through the Wind River Canyon into Fremont County, is what we've done historically. And the basin has lost population again, which will necessitate, I think, a further expansion into Fremont County, which also happens to be our majority minority district county. So Fremont County, you're going to have some, not maybe, you got some issues ahead of you, Julie, as we're well aware. Senator Driscoll. But
Actually, we've got another option there. Natrona is over as well, and we actually can leave Fremont alone. It's almost random. We can drop out of the basin and go into northern Natrona County. So we do have options. We can Fremont alone this time if they put Shoshone in that area back to the county again, and we'll pick up that northwest corner of.
Senator Driscoll, you're thinking like southern Washakie County going into Natrona. There is an old road there I've been on. It takes about 2 hours from Penn Sleep to Lysite, but
We could pave that road as part of this project.
You're correct.
at the Orchard Ranch. Yeah. Okay. I mean, that is certainly a possibility as well to pick up the population necessary. So,
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Scott,
Mr. Chairman.
that's your district.
Yeah, it is. On that one, the Bighorn Basin, you need to give them, they have to have at least 1,350 more population to get up to the minimum sizes. You give them, you're gonna need to give them a bit more so that they can, as a practical matter, district to house districts, either jointly or separately, depending on how they want to do it. I think what we'll discover is that if you entirely do away with, say, we're not going to touch Fremont County at all, and going to get it entirely out of Natrona County, you're going to come down and give them part of the Casper urban area. And I think that would be a problem. We'll need to look at where the population is. But the northeast corner of Natrona County doesn't have, I suspect we get some of that, but it doesn't have that much population. There is some small possibility, Mr. Chairman, going the other way. There are some Wyoming residents in Yellowstone Park that are technically in Teton County. They're isolated no matter what you do. They could be put within the Bighorn Basin just as well as they could Teton County. And that may apply with a little of the adjacent part of Teton County. So that's a possibility too. That's one we'll have to look at the details. And that should be an assignment for the LSO to develop some options.
Ms. Creech is it Mr. Sedgley online who had to testify from Yellowstone National Park? I don't know. He's with us currently. I don't have Zoom pulled up.
Mr. Chairman, his hand is raised if you'd like me to admit him.
Yeah, that would be great. I was just, as we were talking about that, somebody did send up in public comment from the national park, and I assume has thoughts on where the National Park District ends up. Wait,
Hello.
Hey, Mr. Sedgley, the floor is
Hi.
yours.
Excellent. Well, thank you for letting me testify today. I very much appreciate it. We are very isolated up here in Yellowstone, as you know. One of the other special things about Yellowstone is that it's a federal enclave, so our representation status is, in a democratic fashion, is diminished by that. So I would say that right now the House and Senate districts have split in half. And so we are kind of divided already in our representation. And what I would love to see is us actually combined so that the entire park, which is not a ton of people, are voting and represented by the same person or people in the House and Senate. That being said, I'd say demographically that we are probably better aligned with Teton County, just because we also have Grand Teton National Park and the Rockefeller Memorial Parkway there as well. So there's some common aligned, not necessarily interests, but just the nature of the place we live and the issues that we deal with and face, I think are better aligned there. Bighorn Basin would be really strange, I think, to throw us in with them.
But they need more population.
I know.
Hey, do you have an idea of how many full-time? I mean, I'm sure we'll look at when the census numbers come out, but what part of the park do you reside in, and how many roughly people do you think we're talking about?
Yeah, so I live at Madison Junction. I'm one of about 6 or 7 full-time permanent residents there. I think across the park, and Madison Junction is at the very, very northern end of Teton County. But between all the permanent people who live in Wyoming in the park, I believe it's close to about 300 people who are here year-round residents.
Questions for Mr. I guess I didn't have you introduce yourself formally. Are you with any group you're representing?
No, I'm representing myself personally today, and just looking out for the general interest of folks living in the area.
Looks like you're looking out from a nice view in your car.
That is correct, because the internet in the park is too slow, so I have to come out to town to do that here in Montana. So I'm really looking forward to the fiber being laid in the park soon.
Representative Hunt, have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along those lines, aside from Madison Junction, what other, whether or not they are formally designated, census areas, but what specific community, what other communities are there within the boundaries of the park?
Yeah. Those areas within the park would be Madison Junction. It would be Old Faithful, the Grant housing area, the Fishing Bridge area, Mammoth Hot Springs, Tower Junction, and I believe there are a few people at the East Gate and the Northeast Gate. I believe those folks are still in Wyoming, but they might be in Montana right there. But that would be a very, very few people at the Northeast Gate.
So hypothetically, if we were to have some type of public forum or meeting for the residents of the greater Yellowstone National Park, do you have any kind of formal structure of not governance, but a way that, a public forum could be arranged, or kind of a, you're one person of, let's say, 300 and other people may have different views.
Sure.
Any idea how we would set that up, or is there any kind of existing structure where you all, meet up once a year in like a homeowners association or something?
I wish there was. I think that would be warmly welcomed to be heard as a group of people living in the park. And I would suggest contacting the Park Service Administration, but probably the superintendent's office would be the people to contact about that to arrange a meeting. But a meeting at Old Faithful would probably be really well received, so we could all give some input, or even Mammoth.
I'm in. Okay. My first term, we had a meeting in Mammoth Hot Springs. It was great. Any other questions? Not seeing at this time. Thanks for joining us today and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.
It's an area that I don't remember focusing on a whole lot 10 years ago about the residents in the park, and we just divided it out. So certainly appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Good. Do you want to talk about Star Valley next committee? President Dockstetter, do you have any thoughts on, as this committee moves forward? You're well aware that the geography of Lincoln County, but you also now realize that census numbers will kind of cleanly fit for you to have 2 House members and 1 senator in Lincoln County
Sure.
compactly. Yeah, any thoughts you'd like to offer?
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Zon, Sir, Chairman Driscoll, members of the committee. Thank you for the time. Spent a little preview time on this, working with folks in my county. And this is not new to me. We referenced two good senators out of the Southwest. I think I put in all the windshield time with them 10 years ago on this. And then we were sitting in front of Clerk Langford's desk several times over in Pinedale too, making sure that was coordinating for a lot of people, a lot of time, 10 years ago. Here we go again. We actually found a little niche, one of these fun little side stories. Representative McKim and I were headed over to visit with Clerk Langford and a group from Teton County, a group from the Southwest in their commission chambers. And we had the maps spread out across my pickup dashboard. And the late Representative McKim was looking them over, and I was trying to keep the speed down on the ice pack to get there in time, up on the rim there. And he says, there it is. That's what we need. And we took it over to the folks in Pinedale, and they agreed. And that was one of those areas that was kind of a breakthrough moment that we resolved that county region. So I visited with folks down the south end of my county, front porch time, phone time, text time. They're concerned. They don't see the connection in an area that's basically all minerals and potentially some other developments coming along the way that may not fit with the north end of the county. I agreed with them. I've been over backwards to make sure that they were represented on all that mineral work, and will continue to do so, even though it's not part of my area, but I got a passion to make sure it works for that community. So they said, essentially, we'd probably like to stay separate and go into the Southwest, Mr. Chairman. Visiting with the folks in the north end of my canyon, or north end of my county. And they kind of like staying in a valley that has 12 communities, because they're a little bit concerned about being overshadowed by an iconic area to the north. And they feel like they want to say we are unto ourselves. We have a lot of exciting things happening in Alpine, and hospital, and grocery store, brewery, all of that in an area with three rivers coming together. A lot of exciting growth in that area. So they're saying, why should we go north? So that's where we're at. And I know that causes confusion in what we're working on, and we had maybe a ready-made plan. Appreciate the good senator from Bates Creek putting it all together, but that's where we're at, and those are the concerns. And I don't see any of the population decreasing anywhere near soon. I am absolutely amazed. There's a reason they're installing the first phase of a 5-lane highway in our valley, with plans probably next year, the year after, for the second phase of a 5-lane highway. A lot of people moving in, a lot of Texas plates, a lot of California plates, looking for a different way of life. They like what they found. So there we are. Mr. Chairman, any questions?
My difficulty from the doctor, when I look at the numbers, Uinta County will now qualify for basically 2 House seats and 1 Senate. Teton qualifies for a little more than 2 House seats and 1 Senate. If we divide Lincoln County as we have previously, I think it's easy enough to maybe combine the House districts of what would probably be Sublette County and Star Valley. But I don't know where your other senator, which other 2 House seats go together. It would basically probably come or Rock Springs, I would guess.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the South, that was one of the matters that was actually brought up as I came over here last night. I took the southern route and said, could we consider moving down into those areas to pick up the necessary numbers? All that comes back to a regional plan, Mr. Chairman. We've got to get everybody to agree. And 10 years ago, it was difficult and challenging, but we came together.
Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, if we do Lincoln, Sublette, Teton, and Uinta as a region, they need to have just under 1,000 people more to be 4 senators and 8 representatives in that area. And if we were to do Carbon and Sweetwater together, and then Fremont County separate, they can't go to the Bighorn Basin, that's short. Fremont County, we want to leave alone to the extent we can. We almost have to go to Carbon County. It's going to be tight because you'll need some margin. You probably have to Carbon and Sweetwater together have 2,007 people that they could give up and stay within the minimums. So you're gonna have to shift, I don't know, 1,200, 1,300 people probably. Sweetwater County, you're gonna have to be in that district with Lincoln, Uinta, and Sublette Teton. Just to make the math work, Mr. Chairman.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep, go ahead, buddy.
Showed some preference moving down in the green with part of Sweetwater, but so I understand for discussion. If I could, Mr. Chairman, I want to make sure we hear from former clerk Langford, who worked with her hard on this years ago, and here she is following again. So we try to work together as best we can.
Any other questions, President Dockstead, while I have them up? Okay, seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I don't know, I mean, Ms. Langford, you're gonna talk to the county clerks, but any thoughts on the greater Teton Star Valley area at this point? I know, what, 14 years ago, they had a referendum to try to divide Lincoln County in half, didn't quite make it. I'm not sure we're gonna try that again someday, but I see it coming, just as those two communities continue to differentiate. But any thoughts on that region that you've dealt with for 4 years?
Mr. Chairman, I'm Mary Langford, and I live in Sublette County. I'm a retired county clerk. Sublette County in 2010, we had over 10,000 people in our county, and we've lost 1,500 people. So we're needing friends as opposed to having friends this time, I think. We've got some opportunity in northern Sublette County that we could negotiate some population or whatever, but I think we've got a better opportunity to work within our region as it's proposed. Geographically, it works well. Demographically is the challenge, probably. But I think that we've got enough understanding in our area that we could probably put something together and make it work. But we may have to make some friends to the south of us. They don't have any population to give to help either, so it's going to be a bit of a challenge. And I know we in Sublette County have not really had an opportunity to really talk about this yet because we just found out that we just got numbers. So anyway, but ready for public and community meetings.
And they were below estimates, and that hit you pretty hard. I mean, your whole county doesn't qualify for one, but
that's right. Yeah, and before we had too many, so
Yeah.
we gave up some.
Representative Nebraska?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After listening to Senator Dockstetter and Clerk Langford, and being a representative for parts of all three of those counties, there is a cohesiveness to some degree that between all three of those counties, because Jackson seems to be a huge source of employment, and so I know northern Lincoln County, it just travels up the state to go to work in Jackson. And that's a lot of the reason for the growth down there. And then now there's been more and more commuting between Sublette County and Jackson as well. And workforce housing, I think all our sheriffs live down in Lincoln County and a couple live down in Sublette County that are actually employed in Teton County. So those are just concerns. And I think we do have, I know my district has some population needs to still, and it could work, as Clerk Langford said, giving it to Sublette County. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Scott, anything to add?
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to ask Ms. Langford, you said our region, what area were you thinking about when you said that?
Ms. Langford.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, the proposed reason that you proposed, the Teton Lincoln, you went to Sublette.
Sublette.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to get, Mr. Chairman, we're going to have to get some more population to make that work. It's a little too small. Would getting 1,000 or 1,200, something like that, out of, that's what it would have to be, probably about 1,200, 1,300 out of Sweetwater County. that would work for that four county region, would it not?
It's a possibility.
So you would get a Uinta County district that was probably almost entirely Evanston, Bridger Valley, in with a southern Lincoln, a southern sublet and Sweetwater County district, and then two to the north. I'm not sure, but what, we might not have a problem in the Bridger Valley.
That's, Mr. Chairman, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, we drew that part of the state very interesting after the Martin Cooper plan, and I don't know, it's never looked normal to me on how those lines went, but we'll see what proceeds. So committee, just so we have a roadmap, I did send everybody the 2012 redistricting tenants, principles, and that's kind of where I'm moving to discuss, the basic kind of sideboards framework of how we're proceeding. But before we get there, any other conversational topics that we want to discuss? Otherwise, we'll probably go through the 2012 principles and say, are they still relevant? Do we want to research if they're relevant? Do we want to incorporate some now? And then it'll be about lunchtime. Certainly, if there's any public comment right now, maybe now is a good time to take it before we get into the principles. Or committee, do you want to present principles and then take public comment? Love running the show. So I just emailed them out. Are they in the package? Josh or Danielle, the redistricting principles.
Mr. Chairman, I believe they were in the first packet from the first meeting, general corporations meeting. I don't think we resent them this time. I will try to see if we can get them thrown up on the screen.
If you could throw them on the screen, and I'll try to, elucidate them what I can. There were 7 major principles. I'll just go through them for the committee if you don't have the handout in front of you. The first is election districts should be contiguous, compact, and reflect a community of interest. That's US Supreme Court language as well. Anybody want to discuss the redistricting principles of 2011? This was the starting place that election districts should be contiguous, compact, and reflect a community of interest. And I would say management council has already kind of tentatively blessed these as our starting point for redistricting principles. Correct, LSO? And Mr. O'Brien?
Mr. Chairman, Management Council is leaving that up to you to decide on these redistricting principles. Now, what Management Council did lay out is that they're also tasking you with ensuring the LSO staff time is managed well during these proceedings. And to do that, and with such a short time frame, just to let you know, we only bought last year or 10 years ago 2 Massachusetts licenses. It was just Sackett and I that drew the plans, but this year we've got 4. So we've got a much higher capacity to be able to draw plans for legislators, working with their constituents, working with their county clerks, if they want to see different variations of those plans. I'm also a little bit excited about the ability to use Zoom meetings and screen share. Of course, we didn't. It might have existed 10 years ago, but I didn't know about it. So, anyways, Mr. Chairman, yeah, we'll see how those all work out as we move forward.
I think we'll save the discussion for after lunch on how the public and legislators can bring things forward. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, one thing, and I don't know whether we want to elevate it to a principle or not, but one thing we functioned in the past 2 reapportionments. I feel pretty strongly that the business of deciding who's going to be in the legislature is the job of the electorate and not the legislature itself. And for that reason, I want to the extent we possibly can, I think this year we can. I think we ought to, in doing our plans, we ought to ensure that every member has basically stays in the same district they're in to the extent that's possible. I think given the low level of change, that is possible this year. And I think that one's important. It's really, you can take somebody you don't like and finally redistrict them out of the legislature. And I don't think that's an appropriate action. That's the job of the people. So I think that ought to be, at least informally, maybe formally, one of our principles. We'll maintain that to the extent possible. I think it is possible.
Okay, I think I'd like to run through the current and then we'll, I think, discuss as part of those and then any add-ons or elevations or, I think Redistricting Principle 3 has 3 subpoints, so everybody's good with the first one, contiguous, compact, reflect community of interest. I don't think I need to take votes on this, but if anybody wants me to publicly, let me know. Not seeing any. Second is population of election districts shall be substantially equal with the range of deviation not to exceed 10%. Senator Driscoll.
I'll kick back tiny on it. I think that's a principle to look at. It's pretty solid the way they've got it. And I think there's some pretty clear evidence out there as we went to redistricting meetings. You can get outside of the 10%. I personally don't think it makes sense to pick up 300 or 400 people across the county line. So my end, there may be kickback on it, but I will be bringing a statute change to put county lines as a priority in redistricting. I can tell you the one thing I see when I go throughout the state is counties want to be as intact as I can. And I can tell you from having done it, it gets really hard to honestly represent 300, 400, 500 people across the county line. You have to start going to school board meetings, county commission meetings. And I think it makes more sense to stay compact on it. There's numbers of cases out there that the deviation is greater than that. Has held up in court when they have that type of statute, particularly if it's in the Constitution and it is in ours. So I, for one, am not afraid to take a look at trying to keep our counties as intact as possible. That's everything we argue about on the floor. It has to do with county lines and money within counties. It doesn't have to do with the rest. If I'm bringing a general bill, it doesn't matter if I'm lobbying in Sublette County or in Natrona County. When it comes down to fighting for what my county wants, it does matter. And when you stick counties into disparate areas, it leaves legislators having to do some very strange things to represent a very small population. And I personally have done it. It's uncomfortable. And often it leaves that block of voters feeling very disenfranchised because I used to represent like outside the town of Douglas, represent Boston's area. I didn't take all their meetings down there. You didn't drink coffee at breakfast with the guys and you didn't go to it. And they're further ahead having their local guy come to the coffee shop and say, well, do it. So that's my 2 cents worth. I think this one needs either a Caravan or a district.
Hey, Senator Scott, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, and I've had the experience of representing a piece of another county. I had the Whiteside area in Fremont County for over 10 years. It is difficult to represent something outside your home county because our counties really do represent communities. Having said that, I think we could probably get away with a little bit, but we go very far. You look at what the courts have allowed. It has been some very small deviations. They did early one, allowed that once in Virginia. I think they were up to 16% difference. I understand, and I don't know that they've been challenged, that Hawaii was able to be a little over because they were looking at whole islands. And that makes intuitive sense, I think, to anybody. But you really have, particularly when you're dealing with some of the small areas, my northeast corner, the handful of people that live there, they do as much business with Shoshone and Riverton as they do with Casper. They're sort of foot in both communities. We do have that kind of situation. I think we are much better off in general. We want to stick with the county lines as much as we can, but I think we're much better off sticking with the plus or minus 5%. I think we'd have to have a very strong case. It didn't look like some members' special interest. And it looked like there was a good reason for the deviation that was independent of any political consideration. Or we're frankly just financing a lawsuit against us that's going to be successful. The courts really have been very limited in what they've allowed.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. You bring up lawsuits, we all get those. But what we don't talk about is the numbers of districts that are out there that actually do it, that don't get challenged because it's a common sense thing. And there is a number to it. They don't get challenged. In order for us to lose on it, someone's gonna have to come and say, why should we force someone to represent 400 or 500 people or a little chunk? Does that make sense? I think it is defensible in court. I think you're gonna find that 400 or 500 people in most cases would rather be within their county lines than go across. And so for my end, I challenge the reasoning of why you can't do it, because I understand one man, one vote very well. I read the decision, but I also understand the honest, logical end of equal representation. And that's something that's never really been challenged correctly. And, you know, to be stuck in a piece that you're only a tiny little fraction that the guy never shows up, you really don't have one man, one vote. What you've got is someone that never shows up. And usually what happens is the existing representative picks it up for you. Someone goes and does it. I still go across county lines back from my old district from 8 years ago. But in truth, it really ought to be left alone, in my opinion, and it's worth at least a small challenge, particularly when you have the standing of your constitution and it's pass a statute that says that it's priority for us. And it is.
Representative Hunt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would add to that, but I would extend what has been said to candidates themselves. You know, I mean, constituents will vote for people they know. Constituents are going to vote for their neighbors. They're going to vote for the hometown candidate, the home county candidate, and there's within reason there are times when it's going to be unavoidable, but especially when there are these tiny slivers of population where a district bleeds over into a segment of another county. And to use my own district I currently represent as an example, especially 10 years ago before the lines were redrawn, the segment of Goshen County that I represented, there is a more balanced population now. But at the time, taking in the community of JM and the immediate surrounding ranching area, there were, I can't remember, but something like maybe 200 at most 300 people in that part of the county. And so I'm not saying that it certainly by any means should, but it allows the representative of that district, if they are not careful, to ignore that little segment of the population, because even if and so the point I'm making is that if that little community that is this outlier tries to put up a candidate to counterbalance that, they have a humongous uphill battle in getting elected, because when the county next door represents 90% of the population, and that's where the representative or the senator is from, it's almost impossible for those folks to put up a candidate who's going to have a good chance to win it. And so I just would add that to that discussion, and just for food for thought and for everybody's consideration. Thank you.
Representative Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To piggyback on Representative Hunt, that deviation from the 10% to what the Supreme Court stated the maximum allowable in a verifiable situation of 16%. So if you do that calculation, you're talking probably It could be like JM, the small town. It could be LaGrange. It could be several different areas within our two districts that would literally split your neighbor who goes to the grocery store. They see me, they talk to me, but yet they can't vote for me. And so that's just a little more descriptive, you know. I mean, it's about 1,000 people maybe, is what that 16 versus 10. So it could be an entire community that we're splitting off.
I think it's very fair. My concern has always been when the legislator is removed or resigns, and you have to do the weird county percentage split of the county commissioners and who gets a vote and what percentage vote. The natural district principle 3 is that the majority of the population should be in one district. But historically, when we've had a legislator move on, those ratios for county commissioner appointments has been not fair at all in my mind. Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm not sure we exactly have to settle this. We can look at things on a case by case going forward. I do think there's always different ways that you can deal with these situations. You can put that community in the district you want to put them in, but at some point you got to give up somebody else. And it's just every one of them is a tussle and you try to figure it out. I do think there is a little difference when you go to court. If you've got the plus or minus 5%, the other side, my good friends that are attorneys, the other side has to prove that you're wrong. Whereas if we exceed the blessed boundaries, then we will have the burden of proof, or the state of Wyoming will have the burden of proof. Well, that could be pretty hard to do. The standing in the lawsuit, I don't think will just come from that little town. I think that people who are standing to bring suit will be broader than you think. And the other, it comes back to the ripple effect that all of these changes have. When you get down to it, one man, one vote is more important than county lines. It's what it's been ruled over and over and over again. I'm not preaching, I'm telling you what the rulings have been. So that's going to have to be pretty high on the list.
And so ultimately, committee, just so you know where I'm coming from, I would like a standard, and I certainly think it's fine if we exceed that, but that requires that when that point comes, that we have a pretty legitimate reason that will be recorded. And if a lawsuit comes, we can say, hey, the committee on the final plan agreed at whatever percentage that this was kind of the framework, but there's a good reason on behalf of the committee to exceed it. And I think that's what stands up, both having the principle as we move forward, and then if we need to violate a principle, we have a pretty good rationale and documentation of why we've done that. And so I don't know what the percentage you want in the redistricting principle is, but I would certainly like a number. Senator Driscoll.
I would just like to change the word with a suggested deviation, not do 10. It's just a wordsmith, but it gives a little bit of flexibility. I'm not saying that we're going to do it. I'm just saying, as I looked at it, I looked at the end of it, I really do think we have a reason for the reasons given here to look at that. And that's a debate for the committee and maybe a debate on the floor, but I really do think there is reasons when you start looking at one man, one vote is set up to protect the rights of voting. And really, sometimes we vary it, the rights are going to be better in a county line than they are otherwise. And I think people are going to argue that their rights are. And particularly with the Representative Hunt's example, that says, I want to run and I live in JM, or I live in one of these little cutoff pieces, and there is substantially no chance of you being able to represent your county because you're 2% of the voting block. And I think that's a very strong argument for the courts. Not only is voting important, but representation is important, and that deprives somebody of the ability to do it. And in fact, we have had representatives move so that they could be in a different district. I know of multiple examples that have happened in Wyoming as they were in line. So we actually have evidence of that.
Representative Hunt.
Mr. Chairman, quick question, just as a reminder. With the principles that they were adopted here in 2011, were these all of co-equal consideration, or is this ascending, descending list of prioritization where number one is most important, number two, three, et cetera, et cetera?
Ooh, Senator Case or Senator Scott, I don't remember that conversation if these are in a priority or they're all. I think ultimately we want a set of principles moving forward that we're going to stay within, and if we violate, we have good reason to violate. The first one is basically it's a mandate from the Supreme Court, and they kind of go in decreasing order of, I think, court cases that have been involved. Senator Case.
Well, Mr. Chairman, sorry, thank you very much. Just reading the principles, I mean, some of them have wiggle room within them, but I think they all stand up equal. You can see like principle number 3, to the greatest extent possible, that's where the county boundaries should be followed, majority population, census blocks. And number 4, should avoid diluting, that's kind of some wiggle room. 5 is ultimate, 60 and 30. Yeah, there's no wiggle room there. Consideration should be given to 2 contiguous house districts in each Senate district. Well, that's wiggle room. Significant geographic features should be considered. There's wiggle room in that. What's significant? Certainly. So that was like mountain ranges and passes. So I think they're not rated highest to lowest, but some are more definitive than others. Certainly the 2 about population says population election districts should be substantially equal. It doesn't say must be. It says should. There's a little bit of wiggle room there too. But it does say the range should not exceed 10%.
Yeah, we've got 2 hard ones. The range is not to exceed, like I said, I'd like to make a motion to add should into that, should not, and that gives you that same wiggle room. And I'm gonna be the same on 5, once we get that vote on this. I think 5 is clear to the Constitution, how the numbers stack up against each other. I think we ought to give ourselves flexibility if we need to run Senate or House districts up and down, give that flexibility, if that's what it takes to make it work. I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna jury manager all I can.
Want to say that.
Well, that's just the fact what it is. I stand by the county lines. I'm gonna push for it. If it means that we realign, I think there's a constitutional right for that.
So, Mr. I just got to push back. Yeah, it's just Wyoming Constitution doesn't rule here. Wyoming Constitution does say that. It was discussed extensively in the summary judgment issued by the court, and they drooled. They spent a long time talking about Article 3, Section 3. They drilled down on every single word there, and they concluded, the court in summary judgment said that this doesn't say you have to follow county boundaries. And it didn't before. They say that in this decision. So to say that after the Supreme Court's ruled in a series of cases that this has to come back into play and have some credence is wrong. It's just wrong. Doesn't mean we shouldn't consider county boundaries. I'm with you on trying to do it. But to say that it becomes a driving principle would be a bad mistake.
So ultimately, Senator Driscoll.
I didn't say a driving principle. I just said the way it looks. And that's, from my end and going back to the 3060, clearly none of the decisions say that we have to be 3060. So I think that needs to be thrown out. We can deal with it. As far as the county line end, it's a common sense deal. And no, it's not an overriding principle. But what we do as we redistrict is we look through all of it. We try to make it where our representation is as pure as we can, with the one man, one vote. And also, to me, and it's not written into the cases, and that someday it will be litigated, but equal representation. You've got to have fair representation. And just because one man, one vote, it makes about as much sense as non-contiguous districts to ignore county lines. Because that's really the way it works. So from my end, I'm not saying it has to be an overriding principle, but it's already in there to some degree, and I think it needs to stay, if anything, to be a little strength.
So committee, back to the principles, if we can kind of agree on the majority, we can evolve these as we move forward. And just kind of getting a couple of ground rules, and I think as plans come in, yeah, we can evolve the principles. Senator Nethercutt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, just listening to the discussion, it's my perception that the committee is in agreement. And further discussing, I think, some nuanced differences is creating confusion, I think, for the public and perhaps even the committee. I believe everyone recognizes and understands, and our current districts all acknowledge the importance of county boundaries. The guiding principles in the previous redistricting efforts all acknowledge the importance of county boundaries. And so there is consensus there. Senator Case, who has appropriately identified the legal concerns associated with over prioritizing these efforts, is appropriate. So I think for the purpose of moving this along and getting us started for our principles, just recognize that the committee in the history of Wyoming and districts recognizes county boundaries. Of course, I'm from a district that has 5 senators in 1 county, so we handle it just fine in Laramie County. So let's check the box and let's move on.
Okay, so thoughts on the principles? I have heard that we're not necessarily comfortable at this meeting about the 60 seats and 30 seats. Would that be agreeable to remove that from the principles at this time? As we move forward, I do think we'll have a couple of plans with different numbers coming in, 62, 58, whatever it might be. Senator Scott, thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, I will say that I think that the 30-60 has worked quite well for us over the years. If we had something wild we needed to solve by going to 1 more, 1 less, that might be worthwhile. I suspect we don't. 30-60 is going to work perfectly well for us.
Say when I run the numbers, I think there might be some better combinations personally that would hit county lines cleaner, but that's maybe not a fight I want to have today. Representative Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if we were to remove that one,
Mhm.
how would, keeping the line versus removing, how is that in terms of litigation potential? Where do we fall with that?
So I'll just tell you my mindset, and I'm sure I'll be corrected. At this meeting, I'm hoping that we go to the public and say, we know the numbers. We're hoping for input from everyone. Submit some plans that you think work well for your county, maybe for the whole state, on behalf of an interest group or your, whatever it might be. We just have a couple of guiding principles we put forward when we do the ask to the state that says, help us redistrict, give us your ideas. And I don't want to, be too tight. I want to allow for some creativity and flexibility, and I do think 60-30 has served us well for 3 decades, but things change and there may be better ways. So my hope is that we put forward, an ask to the public saying, we got the numbers. What does your community think? Bring us some ideas. I just want to have some general, here's kind of, the basic principles we want you to consider when you're bringing your ideas forward. That is my hope. Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Those are very good comments. I don't think there's any magic to the 30-60. We have a guideline, and it's not an issue for 1 man, 1 vote. It's not a federal issue. We have guidelines that we chose, or that's in our constitution, that we will have at least twice as many representatives as there are senators. That's really the only thing. We have the problem of the size of the facilities at the Capitol, and we can accommodate that. We have chosen the nesting because nesting seems to have had some advantages. It was easier and cleaner. You don't have to be nested. It would get kind of strange, I think, if we went away from it. But there's no magic about the numbers, and I suspect when you get, where you'll get pushback is when somebody loses their seat because of they're the 59th or the 30th, but there's no magic to that. I don't have a problem with taking it out or whatever. I do think we'll probably come back to 30-60. It's just the natural thing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So maybe just change that to be what our Constitution says. That we have to have 2 House members per, or double the House versus Senate. However it's phrased in the Constitution, maybe just put that line in there instead, so that we have that guiding principle, but we're not locked into a particular number.
The Constitution says at least twice.
But no more than 3 times.
So maybe put that phrase.
And quite honestly, with the new desks and the cap, I mean, 60 is tight in the House chambers, we all know. I mean, that's, I don't know what we would do if we exceeded 60. How we have a smaller desk, but that may be a constraining factor. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I covered only the 3 times.
So maybe just for Director Obrecht.
Mr. Chairman, and just something for the committee to consider. If you do consider plans that have different number of representatives and senators than 30 and 60, the problem is your regional approach that kind of goes out the window, because the whole regional approach that either I've done or Senator Scott's done are based on 30 and 60. And so if you do a lower number or a higher number, you're going to really need to redistrict either all the state or a much larger portion of the state to be able to make that work for the county or for the committee to be able to consider.
So committee, maybe it's the most fair at this point, since some people do have, might not be able to join us after lunch, is keep digesting these issues.
All right, are you awake now? Judy, you better stop.
Back okay? Was I too loud or too soft? I was gonna ask for public comment, but the microphone god said no. But if there are some thoughts on the principles that members of the public want to bring now before lunch to give, members of the committee some ideas to think about of what direction you might, want us to take this afternoon. I know some of you have, from what I've heard, some very solid ideas of how you want to redistrict the whole state. I think right now we're still at the point of guiding principles that we would like to send out to the public that we'd like input back on. So that's what I'm hoping. Let me just check if there's any public comment, people who can't come back this afternoon, or people who want to throw some commentary into the fray at this point. Maybe nobody yet. Okay, well, so much for that idea. Representative Duncan.
I'm afraid. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my question would be to the committee. Are there any that we want to add? Because most of these are flexible. They're not set in stone. They're just guiding. So do we have any that we want to add?
Well, and we haven't talked about the majority of the population of each county shall be in one district. I mean, I'm still at the point where you might want to have a 50-50 and divide a district in half to give them an equal chance to have that thing we were talking about, a small portion, in some of our less populated counties. That one kind of just bothers me as a guiding principle, but so maybe I'd like to take out the majority of the population of each county shall be in one district. Is there any pushback against that? I think it's important, but I do think it restricts flexibility until I think it's a different time than it was 10 years ago. We have Zoom, the public has wide access, and I would say much more interest, it seems, on redistricting and a shorter time frame. And so part of me says, hey, I want to hear what all the public could come up with, and then that will probably be more work for this committee to go through. I'm not sure, Idaho had 350 some ideas come in, which might be more work, but I think it's really important in a short time frame to get some interesting ideas and whatever we can do to help that form where we move forward. Director Obrecht, do you have thoughts on that? We can talk a little bit on public portal right now and what maybe LSO knows that other states experienced or are experiencing when it comes to
About the public portal, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so, Mr. Chairman, we discussed with a couple of different states their experience with the public portal. Michael called Oklahoma. They used a free online tool for theirs and got very few submittals, less than a dozen. Yep. Okay. I called Idaho because I knew that they used Maptitude 10 years ago, their public portal. And they had a much more robust response. In fact, Maptitude built that public portal specifically for Idaho because Idaho state statute requires that the public be able to submit plans. And so that's the format they went with. He said there was a little bit of back end work on getting the plans ready to be put on their plan viewer, like we did 10 years ago for legislators submitted plans. And I asked about, did you make the plans conform to any requirements, say the principles that their redistricting committee adopted, or a one-man, one-vote principle? He said, no. He said, anyone could submit whatever plan they wanted, and then the committee decided what weight to give that plan.
So runs the gamut of extremes that we might have 5 plans come in, we might have 300. Until we know, that's why I'd like some kind of, I'm not sure I'm ready to say submit whatever. I would like the public to say, we understand there are guidelines. President Hunt?
I didn't mean to interrupt, Mr. Chairman, if you were still, but I did have a.
Yeah, sure.
Because I guess the other, I mean, at the conference in Salt Lake, the Utah legislators mentioned that they had gotten, I can't remember, 100+ plans. But I guess my point being, simply assuming no out-of-stater would submit a plan, and God knows why they do that. My gut instinct is that we would not be inundated by plans from the public to an extent that that could not be reasonably reviewed and assessed. I just, we still get fewer than 600,000 people, and at the end of the day, if we were to put certain parameters on it to say, you even so simply to saying that if you're going to submit a plan, it has to be statewide, that whatever enthusiasm is out there at a local level would get, that's going to be, by the laws of attrition, whittled down substantially. I just don't think that we're going to have a problem with an inundation tidal wave of publicly submitted plans. So I'd say, give us broad access to the public as well.
Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would encourage maybe, I don't know how they were submitted in the past, but maybe follow the guiding idea that we currently follow when it comes to interim topics and interim committee subjects, that you have to be sponsored by, that topic has to go through a legislator. And maybe so if we did just open it up to the public, it has to be through a legislator that could then submit it. That would cut down on some of the randomness and to make sure that it's a statewide plan that's cohesive rather than, just pockets that doesn't work.
And then I guess the question is, are we asking the public to do a whole statewide plan? Because I would think most people are interested in their localized area, and asking them to, do everything else might be too much unless we have a standard format. And maybe at our next upcoming meetings, we would have the general regional plan, and then we could ask them to continue working with us. Senator Driscoll.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, you just basically covered. I think, the first steps to vote on a regional plan, which I think we should do today. I have to go ahead and move on it, and then they can go ahead and submit into regional plans rather than the whole state.
Okay. And apparently Representative Ayer, you have your hand up online. I can't see that because our screen's taken, but if you can hear me, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a comment. Most of these guiding principles, in fact, all of them except one, are somewhat flexible. They say consideration should be given whenever possible. But number 5 says shall. I wonder if we want to soften that a little bit and make it should, or consideration should be given to, or some wording like that, similar to all the other principles. Just comment.
Well, I'll just tell you my thoughts. I would really like to maybe at our next meeting have various plans that do redistrict the entire state at 60, 30, 58, 62, whatever it might. I think you need an even. I don't know if you need an even number, right? I guess I kind of want to see what might come back. I know there are people pushing, one legislator per county, or every county gets at least one. What does that look like in a, 2-to-1 scenario, and how might it work to try to meet the one man, one vote in the Supreme Court decisions? There might be a way if we guarantee every county at least one legislator, one House seat to make that work. I don't know, but I know there's a push out there in the public that some people want to try that. So maybe that's where I'm for our next meeting, say any kind of initial plans of the numbering and how that might work in a regionalization. I love the regionalization idea. I don't think anybody wants to, nor this committee wants to let anybody try to draw the whole state without divvying it up. But I do know when I've run the numbers, 54 has some clean breaks, 52 House members has some really clean county breaks that fit the basin and my area of the state. So I guess that's where I would like to proceed. I'm one of those people that don't like to cut off everything too soon. And maybe that would be the ask for our next meeting as we continue working with the public and our county officials who are speaking this afternoon. Other thoughts on redistricting principles that we can chew on over lunch? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, just to think about what was said, if you do a plan, roughly doing the math in my head, that is going to give every county at least one representative, you're talking about have any chance of succeeding in federal court. You're talking about having a House in the vicinity of 200 to 250 members. Frankly, I don't think that's at all sensible or feasible. And I do think we ought to adopt a regional system. And I do think then you might get some plans that were just for particular regions within the parameters we've set for that region. And that I think could be quite valuable.
Other thoughts before we go to lunch on redistricting principles? I think if I give everybody an hour to kind of, discuss with various constituencies at lunch or get some public comment over our emails, at least I keep getting some. Maybe that'll help drive our decisions this afternoon. But I sense we're not quite at an impasse, but maybe some time away and thinking, what do we want our next meeting to look like? And maybe that's our incremental approach as we kind of quickly and efficiently dive into what a plan might look like. I kind of want to get some hard decisions made today and kind of don't, because I need some flexibility to help us move forward. So public comments before lunch from the committee. Anyone in the public wish to talk about anything on the principles before we go to lunch? Otherwise, we're back about 1:30. All right, not seeing any, let's take lunch.